In this lecture, let us discuss part 5 of the Constitution of India, and we are talking about Union Executive. Who all are part of the Union Executive? President, Vice President, Prime Minister, the Council of Ministers of the Prime Minister, as well as the Attorney General of India. You have to be absolutely sure who all are part of the Union Executive because there can be a prelims-based question in your examination on this particular topic as well. Now let us take up all these individuals and institutions one by one. We will explain the constitutional provisions regarding all these institutions, but first up, we'll take up the office of the President of India. In this chapter, we'll talk about how the President of India is elected. What are the qualifications required for somebody to contest the presidential election? What are the powers available with the President of India? What is the term of office for the President of India? Can the President of India recontest the election? If he can recontest the election, what is the maximum number of times that a president can be re-elected to his office? And we also look at how the President of India can be removed from his office. And for that, Constitution has used a very specific term called impeachment. All this we are going to discuss in this lecture. But first up, Article 52 of the Indian Constitution. And this is the shortest article under the Constitution of India. This article states there shall be a President of India. Now this word shall is very important. What is the meaning of this word? There shall be a President of India. That means under no circumstances can the office of the President remain vacant. There has to be someone occupying the position of the President of India. Our constitutional scheme can never be envisaged even for a brief moment, even for a short duration, without somebody occupying the post of the President of India. That means the post of the President of India is a necessary condition. There has to be someone occupying the position, the post of the President of India. That is what Article 52 talks about. Then Article 53 states something very important. It states the executive power of the Union shall be vested in the President. What is Union? That is the central government. All the executive powers of the central government shall be vested in the office of the President of India. That means all these executive powers. Who will exercise these powers? The President of India. But there's a problem. The problem is, what do we mean by the executive power? If Constitution talks about there shall be a President of India, we know for sure that the office of President can never remain vacant. Somebody has to occupy this post. If President dies or resigns, someone else will occupy the post of the President, but someone will be there, that we know. But when Article 53 states that the executive power of the Union, that is the central government, will be vested in the office of the President of India, what do we mean by the executive power? The problem is, this term, executive power, has not been defined in the Constitution. Constitution does not define what is it that we are talking about executive power. Constitution only says executive power of the Union shall be vested in the President. But what is this executive power? Constitution has not defined. Then we rely on constitutional experts so that they can tell us what is this executive power. We rely on Supreme Court judgments so that these Supreme Court judgments can explain or underline what do we mean by the executive power of the Union that is vested in the office of the President of India. The first judgment of this matter, the year was 1955, Ram Jabaya Kapoor versus State of Punjab. In this judgment, the Supreme Court tried to explain what is this executive power. Supreme Court said maintenance of order is an executive power and that is the power available with the President of India. That means executive power means maintenance of the order in the society. Supreme Court further said promotion of social and economic welfare. That also comes under the executive power of the President. Supreme Court further said giving direction to the foreign policy of this country. What should be our relationship with our neighbors? What should be our relationship with the Middle East? What should be our relationship with the superpowers, United States, China, Russia, for example? The direction of this foreign policy. That is the executive power and this power is available with the President of India. Supreme Court made one interesting statement. Supreme Court said carrying on or supervision of the general administration of the state. That comes under the executive power and this executive power is vested in the office of the President of India. But even then, this judgment was not clear. If I'm going to tell you that carrying on the general administration of the state is an executive power and this power is vested in the office of the President of India, even then you will not be clear what is this executive power. Now, the beautiful definition of this executive power is given by Wayne and Bradley in their pioneering book, Constitution and Administrative Law. In this book, Wayne and Bradley try and explain what is this executive power. These gentlemen say that executive power is a residue. What do we mean by residue? Leftover. Leftover of what? Once you subtract judicial powers, because these judicial powers are available with the judiciary, the Supreme Court, superior courts, and once you subtract the legislative powers, because these legislative powers are available with the parliament. Legislative powers means the power to make laws. And who has the power to make laws in this country? The legislature, Parliament of India, state legislatures. Executive power is a residue. Leftover. Leftover of what? Once you subtract the legislative powers and the judicial powers of the courts, whatever is left, that is the residue. Whatever is left, that is the executive power. And all these executive powers are vested in the office of the President of India. Now the things become clear, sort of clear. That there shall be a President of India, we cannot imagine the office of President remaining vacant, even for a short duration. Someone has to occupy this post. And second, all the executive powers are vested in the office of the President of India. And what is this executive power? Now we know. Whatever is left, once we subtract the judicial powers of the superior judiciary, the courts, and once we subtract the legislative powers of the legislature, the parliament, whatever else is left, that is the executive power. And all these executive powers are given, vested in the office of the President of India. But again, there's a confusion. If all these powers are available with the President of India, then what is the role of the Prime Minister? Is the role of the Prime Minister inferior than that of the President of India? Or is the role of the President superior than that of the President of India? Or is the role of the President inferior than that of the Prime Minister? To understand that, let me take you back to history. Constituent Assembly, what is this Constituent Assembly? A group of people coming together to draft the Constitution of India. The President of this Constituent Assembly was Dr. Rajendra Prasad. And Dr. Rajendra Prasad later on became the first President of India. And he remained the President of India for two successive terms, consecutive terms. When Dr. Rajendra Prasad was the President of the Constituent Assembly, and when the office of President was debated in the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Rajendra Prasad made an interesting statement. He said, our constitutional scheme will be similar to United Kingdom, and it will not be similar to the United States. That means we will not follow United States presidential democracy, but we will follow United Kingdom's parliamentary democracy. And in parliamentary democracy, it is cabinet which is supreme. In parliamentary democracy, it is the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister which has the real power. And nominal power is vested in the office of the President. That means if you look at United Kingdom, the head of the state is the Queen. All the powers are vested in the Queen. But Queen cannot exercise the powers on her own. The real powers are vested with the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. And whatever Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers recommend to the Queen, that Queen shall have to do. Queen does not have an independent power. Queen does not have a discretionary power. That means the Queen can do whatever she wants to do. No, because her powers are to be exercised on the basis of the advice given by the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. That is what Dr. Rajendra Prasad said. In the Constituent Assembly debates, when the office of the President was being discussed, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, the President of the Constituent Assembly, said that we will follow British parliamentary model. And in this British parliamentary model, whatever action is taken by the President, whatever decision is taken by the President, he cannot do that independently. He has to abide by whatever is recommended to him by the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. That means in parliamentary democracy, we have some sort of dual executive. The real powers are vested with the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. The nominal powers are vested in the office of the President of India. But President cannot exercise these powers without the recommendation by the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. That is what Rajendra Prasad said in the Constituent Assembly. But later on, after a few years, after India became a republic, after we gave ourselves the Constitution of India, at the Law University, now the President of India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, is saying that our Constitution has placed no restriction on the powers of the President of India. Because if President will have to exercise his powers on the basis of the recommendation of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers, that is not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution. So President of India will have his own independent powers. President of India is the real power center in Indian constitutional scheme. Because Constitution has never talked about that president shall have to always abide by the recommendations and the advice of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. So there was some clash between President Rajendra Prasad and Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the first Prime Minister of India. How we got to know about this? Constitutional expert Subhash Kashyap published a book, and in this book there was a mention of a series of letters exchanged between the President and the Prime Minister, the first President and the first Prime Minister of India. And these letters revealed some sort of a clash between Pandit Nehru and Dr. Rajendra Prasad. The clash was that Constitution only talks about, under Article 74, that there shall be a Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to do what? To aid and advise the President. This is how Article 74 stood when the Constitution was enacted on 26 January 1950. Only simple line. There shall be Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to do what? To aid and advise the President. So now Dr. Rajendra Prasad has completely reversed his position. In Constituent Assembly debates, he made it clear that we will follow British parliamentary model, where the real powers are vested with the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers, and the Queen will have to do everything and anything, whatever is recommended by the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. But a few years later, he's making a different statement. He says, look at Article 74 of the Indian Constitution. It only talks about there shall be Prime Minister, there shall be a Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to do what? To aid and advise the President. Where is it mentioned that whatever advice is given by the Prime Minister that is binding on the President of India, it is not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution? Since it is not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution, the President can take independent decisions as well, without the aid and advice of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. So there was a clash between the first President and the first Prime Minister. Then came the Supreme Court. 1955, the same judgment, Ram Javayak case, the Supreme Court made it clear. The President is only a formal or constitutional head of the executive. The real powers are vested with the ministers. That means the real powers are vested with the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. So the thing started becoming clearer and clearer when in 1955 the Supreme Court made it abundantly clear that the real power is vested with the ministers headed by the Prime Minister. The President is only a constitutional head of the state, is only a nominal head of the state. The real power is vested with the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. So despite the fact that the President of India is the first citizen of this country, and one implication of being the first citizen of this country is when census exercise is carried out. Census exercise carried out every 10 years to count the number of people, to count the population in this country. When the census exercise is carried out, the first person to be enumerated in the census is the President of India, followed by the spouse of the President of India. So that is one implication of President being the first citizen of this country. And while President is the first citizen of this country, he is only a nominal head of the state, a titular head of the state. He does not have much powers of his own, because all his powers are to be exercised based on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. That is what Supreme Court said in 1955. Another judgment, 1971. UNR Rao versus Indira Gandhi. Supreme Court again made it clear that our constitution is modeled on the lines of the British constitutional scheme, not on the lines of the American constitutional scheme. In the United States of America, the President is the real executive. In India and in Britain, the Queen or the President is the nominal head of the state. The real executive powers are vested with the office of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. Then came another landmark judgment, Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab. In this case, the question before the judiciary was that the judiciary, Constitution at multiple places talks about the satisfaction of the President. If the President is satisfied, he can promulgate national emergency. If the President is satisfied, he can impose president's rule. If the President is satisfied, he can impose financial emergency. If the President is satisfied, he can promulgate an ordinance. If the President is satisfied, he can do this, he can do that. What is this? Satisfaction of the President of India. The Supreme Court in Shamsher Singh versus State of Punjab made it clear that it is not the personal satisfaction of the President. It is the satisfaction of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. That means unless and until the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister recommend to the President that you impose national emergency, the President cannot do that on his own. It is the recommendation of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister recommending to the President impose president's rule. On his own, President cannot impose a president's rule. Without the recommendation of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers, President can do nothing. That means President is bound always by the aid and advice of the Prime Minister. So that was the interpretation of Article 74 of the Indian Constitution. And what Article 74 talked about? There shall be Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to aid and advise the President. The implication of this article is, because of series of judicial decisions, now the position is clear. The President is the nominal head, the real executive is the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. Then came 1976. This was the year of emergency, and Constitution was amended for the 42nd time. 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act. Indira Gandhi was the Prime Minister, and in this Constitutional Amendment Act, the Parliament amended the Constitution, amended Article 74, and made it absolutely clear. This line was added to the Constitution, to the Article 74 of Indian Constitution. There shall be Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to aid and advise the President. This was what the original Constitution talked about. Now, 1976 Amendment, another line was added. Who shall act on that advice? And this word shall makes it binding on the President to accept the aid and advice of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. If the President decides to go against the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister, then President of India will be liable for impeachment, will be liable for being removed from his office. Then emergency was revoked in 1977, and much to the delight of the opposition, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi called for fresh elections. The opposition, it was a group of political parties who came together on one common agenda that we have to defeat Indira Gandhi, come with me. And this opposition unity resulted in the defeat of Indira Gandhi in 1977 elections, and Janata Party came to power, and Shri Morarji Desai became the Prime Minister of this country. One of the promises made by the Janata Party to the people of this country was that we will undo all the damages that Indira Gandhi government has done to the Constitution. So all these changes that Indira Gandhi government has made to the Constitution, we will undo all these changes. And in 1978, Constitution was amended for the 44th time, and Article 74 was amended again. And this statement was added to the Article 74 of the Indian Constitution, provided the President may ask for reconsideration of that advice and shall act on the advice re-tendered. That means despite another amendment to the Constitution, position is still the same. President is the nominal head. The real head is the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. How? Original Constitution said there shall be Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to aid and advise the President. It was not mentioned that this aid and advice is binding on the President. But it was understood that since we follow parliamentary democracy, this aid and advice will be binding on the president. That means whatever advice is given by the Prime Minister, that will be binding on the President of India. But I told you about the clash between Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Then because of series of Supreme Court judgments, it became abundantly clear that the real executive is the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. The nominal head or the constitutional head or the titular head of the state is the President of India. But then Indira Gandhi government got the Parliament to amend the Constitution, and now this amended article explicitly says who shall act on that advice. That means it is binding on the President to accept whatever advice is given by the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. In came Janata Party. The Parliament again amended the Constitution and made one concession in favor of the President. That means, let's say, Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers is recommending to the President, please impose national emergency on this country. Initially, till 1976, it would have been binding on the President to accept this aid and advice and quickly impose national emergency. But because of this 1978 amendment, 44th amendment, now the President can do. Now what the President can do? President can refer this recommendation back. President may ask the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers, please reconsider your advice. You're saying that please impose national emergency. I'm asking you, please reconsider this advice. Do you really want me to impose national emergency in this country? And if the same advice is tendered again back to the President of India, he does not have an option. He has to impose national emergency or he should resign from his office. That is the combined effect of these two amendments on Article 74 of Indian Constitution. To make it even simpler for you, Constitution says there shall be a President of India. That means the office of President cannot remain vacant even for a short duration. That is not envisaged by our Constitution. Article 53 says all executive powers are vested in the office of the President of India. But what is this executive power? We don't know, because Constitution has not defined what is this executive power. Then we rely on constitutional experts, we rely on Supreme Court judgments, and we have now come to a conclusion. What is this executive power? And what is this executive power? Residue, leftover. Subtract judicial powers, subtract legislative powers. Whatever else is left, that's the executive power. And all these executive powers are vested in the office of the President of India. But if all these executive powers are vested in the office of the President of India, does that mean the President is more powerful than the Prime Minister of this country? Constitution originally said no. Constitution said we will follow parliamentary democracy. And in parliamentary democracy, it is the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister, which is the real executive. The real holder of these powers is the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. And these Council of Ministers are for the aid and advice of the President of India. Original Constitution said there shall be Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to aid and advise the President. It was not mentioned that whatever advice is given by the Council of Ministers to the President, it is binding on the President. It was not mentioned. Then we talked about the clash between Nehru and Dr. Rajendra Prasad. And because of a series of judicial pronouncements, now it becomes clear that the real executive power is vested with the office of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. And President is only a nominal head of the state, a titular head of the state, a constitutional position holder of the state. Then there were two very important amendments to Article 74. In 1976, a line was added to Article 74. There shall be Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to aid and advise the President who shall act on that advice. That means it made it binding on the President to accept whatever advice is given by the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. And in 1978, another amendment was done, and one concession was given to the President. You can send this recommendation back only once. You can send this recommendation, whatever is recommended to you by the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers, but only once. If the same advice is tendered again to the President of India, he has no other option but to accept that aid and advice, or he should resign from his office. That means to make it even simpler for you. In Indian constitutional scheme, President is nothing but a rubber stamp. The real powers are with the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. Does that mean the President of India has no discretionary power? Yes. What do we mean by discretionary power? I can do something out of my discretion. I can switch off the light, switch on the light, turn off the AC, turn off the AC. I don't have to seek permission from anybody to do this. That's discretion. Doing something on your own without somebody else telling you what to do. Can President of India have discretionary powers? That means can President do anything without the aid and advice of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers? No. That means there are no discretionary powers available with the President of India, except one. What is that discretionary power? Appointment of the Prime Minister himself. This is the only discretionary power available with the President of India. Appointment of the Prime Minister. Because the Constitution says the Prime Minister shall be appointed by the President. Who this Prime Minister is, Constitution is silent on this. Who this Prime Minister can be, the Constitution is silent on this. Constitution only says that the Prime Minister shall be appointed by the President. Can President appoint anybody as the Prime Minister? Yes, because that's the discretionary power of the President. But on the surface, it looks like the discretionary power of the President. But when you dig deeper, even this is not discretionary power. Because can President appoint me as the Prime Minister of this country? Yes, but then immediately I have to prove my confidence on the floor of Lok Sabha. I have to prove majority on the floor of Lok Sabha. If the majority of the MPs in Lok Sabha support me as the Prime Minister of this country, I will continue as the Prime Minister of this country. But if I'm not in a position to cover the majority on the floor of the Lok Sabha, I have no other option but to resign. And then the President has to appoint someone who has the majority on the floor of the Lok Sabha. And only that individual who commands majority on the floor of the Lok Sabha can continue as the Prime Minister of this country. That means in one way, appointment of the Prime Minister is the discretionary power of the President. 100%. But once you dig deeper, even this is not discretionary power. Because President has to appoint someone as the Prime Minister who has the majority on the floor of the Lok Sabha. That is why President appoints somebody whose party has won the majority in the Lok Sabha elections as the Prime Minister of India, or appoint somebody who commands majority, or the President appoints somebody who is the leader of the largest coalition in Lok Sabha as the Prime Minister of this country. It is only when no political party gets a majority in Lok Sabha elections, or no coalition gets a majority in the Lok Sabha elections, that the President can use his discretion and appoint anyone as the Prime Minister, and then this Prime Minister will have to prove his majority on the floor of the Lok Sabha. If he proves majority, simple majority on the floor of the Lok Sabha, Prime Minister can continue. If not, then someone else is to be appointed as the Prime Minister who can command majority in Lok Sabha. And if there is nobody commanding majority on the floor of Lok Sabha, then fresh elections will be called, and a new election will decide who is going to be the next Prime Minister of this country. So till now, we have talked about who is this President of India and what is the constitutional position of the President of India. Now let's talk about how the President of India is elected to his office. The President of India is elected by an electoral college in an indirect election, by a system of proportional representation system, by means of single transferable vote, and through secret ballot. Now let's look at all these 5 things one by one so that you can understand how the President of India is elected to his office. The President of India is elected by an electoral college. What is this electoral college? Electoral college. That means a group of people who can vote in the election of the President of India, who all are part of this electoral college, who can vote so that a new President of India is elected. Electoral electoral college consists of elected members of both houses of the parliament. Which are the two houses of the Indian parliament, Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. In Lok Sabha, there are 2 nominated MPs, and we will discuss later who these 2 nominated MPs are. Somebody called Anglo-Indians. In Rajya Sabha, we have 12 nominated MPs, nominated by the president from the fields of arts, literature, science, social service, so on and so forth. These nominated members of Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, they do not participate in the election of the president of India. So electoral college consists of elected members of both houses of the parliament, not the nominated members. Nominated members cannot vote in the presidential election. Electoral college also consists of elected members of the legislative assemblies of the states. In legislative assemblies also, there is one nominated MLA. Again, Anglo-Indian. And this nominated MLA does not participate in the election of the president of India. He does not. She does not. Then there are some states which have bicameral legislature, which have 2 houses. Just like at the central level, we have 2 houses. Bicameral legislature, 2 houses. Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha. In some states, we have 2 houses. Legislative Assembly and Legislative Council. Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Maharashtra, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka, Jammu and Kashmir. Odisha Assembly also passed a resolution that we should have a Legislative Council in place. But as of now, there are only 7 states in India which have Legislative Council. But these members of the Legislative Council, they do not participate in the election of the President of India. That means President of India is elected, number 1, by an electoral college. And who all are members of this electoral college? Elected members of both Rajya Sabha as well as Lok Sabha. 2, elected members of state legislative assemblies. And the state legislative assemblies also include Delhi and Puducherry. Because Delhi and Puducherry, both union territories, they are not state legislatures, they are not states, but since Delhi and Puducherry, they are the only 2 union territories which have legislative assembly. All the elected MLAs of Delhi and Puducherry assembly, they also are part of this electoral college and they all vote together. And they all vote to elect the President of India. That means number 1, the President of India is elected by an electoral college. That means a group of people who have the right to vote so far as the election of the President is concerned. And who are these individuals? Elected MPs of Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, elected MLAs of state legislative assemblies, not councils, and elected MLAs of the legislative assembly of 2 union territories, Delhi and Puducherry. So the President of India is, number 1, elected by an electoral college. Number 2, indirect election. What is the difference between a direct election and indirect election? The President of India is also elected by the people of this country, but not directly. People do not directly come out and vote in these elections to elect the President of India. They don't vote directly, but they vote indirectly. How? I, as an individual citizen of this country, I have cast my vote in favor of my MLA, in favor of my MP. You have also done the same. And all our representatives are sitting in parliament, in state legislative assemblies. Now these MPs and MLAs will cast vote on our behalf to elect the next President of India. That means the President of India is not elected directly by the people, but is elected indirectly by the people through their representatives in parliament and in state legislative assemblies. But why? Why can't there be direct election to the office of the President of India? This idea was discussed in the Constituent Assembly when the manner in which the election of the President will take place was being discussed and debated in the Constituent Assembly. Some people recommended that President should be elected directly by the people. People should come out, vote in the large numbers, and elect the President of India. Some said no, President of India should be voted. Some said no, President of India should be elected, but in an indirect manner, in an indirect election. That means the President should be elected by the people, but not directly, indirectly, through the representatives in Parliament and state legislatures. But why? Multiple reasons. Number 1, election in India is a very costly affair. Thousands of crores of rupees are spent in the elections. And in 1950, we were poor. We are still facing acute poverty at different places in this country. And in 1950, we were even more poor. Elections require money, resources, so it would have been very costly if we had Lok Sabha elections, legislative assembly elections as well, plus presidential elections as well. That is why, to save money, elections to the office of the president was to be done in an indirect manner. That was one argument. Second reason why we should have, and we have, indirect election to the office of the president is this. Who has the real authority or real power under the Indian constitutional scheme? The Prime Minister. And who is the nominal head of this country? The President of India. Now, if President is also directly elected by the people, Prime Minister is also directly elected by the people, although Prime Minister is not directly elected. But this individual who becomes the Prime Minister is directly elected by the people. MPs are directly elected by the people. So if tomorrow there's a clash between the President and the Prime Minister, Prime Minister would recommend something to the President, President would not agree. President would say, no, I will not agree. But Prime Minister would say, I'm directly elected by the people. So you have to accept what I'm recommending you. The President would go and say, I'm also directly elected by the people, so you listen to what I'm saying. So there will be a huge ego clash between 2 directly elected individuals for this very reason. The real power is vested with the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers, and they are directly elected by the people. To remove any possibility of a clash, we should have a president who is indirectly elected by the people. Members of the Constituent Assembly said, if in practice the president is the nominal head of this country, the real powers are vested with the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers, why should we misuse our time, resources, money to have direct election for the office of president as well? Let's settle for an indirect election for the office of the President of India. That means number 1, president is elected by an electoral college. And who all are part of the electoral college, you know now. President is elected by an electoral college in an indirect election. That is elected by the people, but not directly. Indirectly, through their representatives in parliament and state legislatures. Indirect election. And why we have indirect election for the office of the president? We have the explanation for that. President elected by an electoral college in an indirect election through a system called proportional representation system. What do we mean by this proportional representation system? If you look at Article 55 of Indian Constitution, you don't have to remember and memorize these articles, but just for the sake of simplicity, just for the sake of continuum, I'm giving you article numbers as well, but it is not required. Article 55 states that as far as practicable, there shall be uniformity in the scale of representation of the different states and the election of the president. Now, what is the implication of this? To understand this, we need to understand the difference between first past the post system and proportional representation system. What is this first past the post system? Let's say, for example, this is a constituency. In this constituency, who will be the representative? Who will be the MLA or an MP who will represent the people of this constituency in Lok Sabha or state legislative assembly? Somebody who wins the election. But how do these individuals win the election? What is the minimum or maximum number of votes required by somebody in order for this individual to win an election and represent you in Lok Sabha or in state legislative assemblies? That means, to make it simple, if this is a constituency, this is your constituency, my constituency, and we have to send our representative to Lok Sabha to represent this constituency. This representative, how do we choose this representative? Is it that if anybody gets more than 50% of the votes, then this candidate is our representative in Lok Sabha? No. We follow a system called first past the post system. That means whoever gets the highest number of votes, not the majority. Majority votes would be 50% or more. Whoever gets more than 50% of the total votes polled, this is the majority vote. But we don't follow that. What we follow, highest number of votes. And this is where the problem lies as well. How? Let's say this is the constituency, and there are 10 candidates who are contesting this election. Total number of votes polled in this constituency, let's say it is 1 lakh. Out of 1 lakh votes which have been polled, candidate A got 10,001 votes. Candidate B got 9,000 votes. Candidate C got 8,000 votes. Candidate Z got 6,000 votes. Who is your representative in Lok Sabha? Somebody who got 10,001 votes. That means A. Since A got highest number of votes, A is your representative in Lok Sabha from your constituency. But if you look at it differently, 89,999 people voted against A. That means majority of the people in this constituency voted against A, but even then, A is your candidate, A is your representative in Lok Sabha because he got highest number of votes. That is what we call first past the post system. That means whoever crosses the highest number of votes will be your candidate, will be your representative in Lok Sabha or in state legislative assemblies. Let me give you the example of 2014 elections. BJP got close to 31% of the total votes polled, but look at the number of seats they had in Lok Sabha, 282. Next was the Congress party, 19.67 votes, and the number of MPs in Lok Sabha belonging to the Congress party, 44. Then third largest party in terms of vote share was the Bahujan Samaj Party. 4.2% of the total votes polled, but the number of seats in Lok Sabha, 0. There was AIADMK, which bagged close to 37 seats in Lok Sabha. There was Trinamool Congress of Mamata Banerjee, close to 35 seats in Lok Sabha, but their vote percentage was much less than BSP. It was in the range of 3.5%. That means 3.5% for AIADMK and Trinamool Congress. And the number of seats for these parties in Lok Sabha was 37, 35, so on and so forth. That means BSP, despite the fact that third highest number of votes were polled in favor of the BSP, but there was no candidate of BSP in Lok Sabha. Because that is the flaw of this first past the post system. If you look at the voters who favor AIADMK, they were concentrated in Tamil Nadu and Puducherry. The voters of Trinamool Congress, predominantly they were concentrated in West Bengal, and that is why they were in a position to bag large number of seats from Tamil Nadu and West Bengal in Lok Sabha. But the vote of Bahujan Samajwadi party is scattered. It's not just concentrated in Uttar Pradesh, but it is also there in Rajasthan, in Madhya Pradesh, in Chhattisgarh, in Punjab, so on and so forth. Since their vote was scattered, they were not in a position to cross the highest number of votes in any constituency that they contested on, and that is why, despite the fact the third largest party in terms of vote share was BSP, but they had no representative in the Lok Sabha. That is first past the post system. But an alternative to first past the post system is proportional representation system. In proportional representation system, the country is not divided into constituencies. So in first past the post system, the entire country is divided into constituencies, 543 constituencies on which the election will be conducted. And whoever from a particular constituency bags highest number of votes, this particular gentleman or a woman will be your representative in Lok Sabha. But that is in first past the post system. In proportional representation system, what is the number of seats in Lok Sabha on which the election takes place? 543. What is 31% of 543? Those many seats will be given to the BJP. That means in terms of your vote share, that percentage of vote share that you have, convert that into number of seats, that number of seats. That means in proportion to your vote share, those many seats will be allocated to your party in Lok Sabha. That means 31% of 543, those many seats to BJP. 19% of 543, those many seats to Indian National Congress. 4.2% of 543, those many seats will be allocated to Bahujan Samajwadi Party in Lok Sabha. Which system do you think is better? On paper, it looks like proportional representation system is slightly better than first past the post system. Because here every vote will be counted. 4.2% of the people, they had no representation in Lok Sabha. That means 4.2% of our population have no voice in Lok Sabha. But if we would have been following proportional representation system, 4.2% of 543, those many seats would have been allocated to BSP. But once you dig deeper, there is another problem. At the peak of the Modi wave in 2014 elections, all the BJP could get is 31% of the votes. That means even at the peak of the Modi wave in 2014, the BJP was in a position to only get 31% of the votes. That means then coalition governments would be the order of the day. No political party would be in a position to acquire more than 50% of the total votes. And that means coalition governments will be the order of the day. There won't be a single party government at the center. That is one problem with proportional representation system. Second problem with proportional representation system. Since the country is not divided into constituencies, and since the country is not divided into constituencies, that means there are no candidates. You vote for a political party rather than a candidate. But then if you vote for a political party rather than a candidate, that means let's say 19% people who voted in favor of Indian National Congress, those many seats will be allocated to Indian National Congress in Lok Sabha. But who would be these 19% candidates in Lok Sabha belonging to the Congress party? Maybe they would be the sycophants of the Gandhi family. Maybe they would be the sycophants of the party president. Similarly, 31% seats bagged by the BJP. Who will be these 31% people who would be recommended to the Lok Sabha by the BJP? The admirers of the Modi and Amit Shah. That means in first past the post system, I choose a candidate and I can hold this candidate accountable in the next election because this candidate will now be accountable to me. But in proportional representation system, since you vote for a party rather than a candidate, and the party will then choose its sycophants, the sycophants of its top leaders to the parliament, and then these individuals would be accountable to their party presidents, to their party chairpersons rather than to the people. So accountability will be less. The drafters of our constitution in Constituent Assembly, they decided that for Lok Sabha elections, for Legislative Assembly elections, we should follow first past the post system. Whoever bags highest number of votes will be your candidate, will be your representative in Lok Sabha and Legislative Assemblies. But for the President of India, President should be the nominee, President should be the representative of the entire country. And that is why, so far as the election of the President is concerned, we will follow proportional representation system. We will not follow first past the post system. But even then, you would not be in a position to understand how proportional representation system is used in the election of the President of India. I will give you a very simple explanation of that. Let's say, for example, we followed first past the post system for the election of the President of India. We have 29 states. We have 7 union territories. Clear? That means in first past the post system, we will divide our country into constituencies. Now we have 29 plus 7, that means 36 constituencies. Who is the President of India? Somebody who gets the majority, somebody who bags the highest number of votes. Let's say, for example, there are 2 candidates in the fray who are contesting the election. But now let's look at this closer. Anybody who gets 19 votes will become the President of India. What if there is a candidate A who has a strong hold in 7 sisters, 7 northeastern states, plus Sikkim, plus smaller states such as Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Jammu and Kashmir, Delhi, Puducherry, Goa, Andaman and Nicobar, Daman and Diu, so on and so forth. That means this individual, his vote share is concentrated only in smaller states. And his vote share is very less in big states such as large states such as Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Bihar, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Tamil Nadu, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, so on and so forth. But even then, A would be the President of India because he bagged the highest number of votes. That means this A is not the representative of the entire country because the population is concentrated in UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, so on and so forth. A does not have any presence in these 4 or 5 big states. That means majority of the population of this country, they are not in favor of A, but despite that, A is the President of India. Now there can be another situation. There can be 5 candidates in the fray. There are 5 candidates in fray to contest the presidential election, and there is one candidate from the Northeast who has bagged all the 7 sisters in Northeast plus Sikkim. That means we will have a nominee from the Northeastern state as the next president of India. But since this individual has a stronghold only in Northeast, he is not acceptable to the people in the South or West or Central India. But even then, this individual is the next president of India. Or conversely, let's look at it this way. There is one candidate belonging to the Hindi heartland, Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Jharkhand. But this candidate is not acceptable to people in the North. This candidate is not acceptable to the people in the East and the Northeast. But since we follow the first past the post system, this candidate is the next president of India. Constitution makers thought that this president should be somebody who reflects the majority of the people of this country. That is why we will not follow first past the post system in presidential election. We will follow proportional representation system. And in proportional representation system, we will take into account the population of that state as well. And it is based on the population of that state that the value of the vote of an MLA and the value of the vote of an MP will differ. So that we have a candidate who is the representative of the majority of the people of this country. How? That means for the election of the President of India, the manner prescribed by the Constitution under Article 55 is, as far as practicable, there shall be uniformity in the scale of representation of different states at the election of the President. That means it should not be that the smaller states in terms of the population, smaller states in terms of population should not have more advantage as compared to large states which have more population. That means so far as presidential election is concerned, there should not be undue advantage for a smaller state as compared to a larger state. That is why there is a mathematical formula. Vote of an MLA, when we calculate, we take into account the total population of the state divided by total number of elected MLAs into 1 by 1000. That means a smaller state will have a lesser value for his ME. That means for a smaller state, the value of the vote of an MLA will be less. Value of vote for an MLA in a large state will be more. That means we will take into account the population of the state. Value of a vote of an MP, since MP represents a larger constituency, MLA represents a smaller constituency. Value of a vote of an MP is total value of votes of all MLAs in this country divided by total number of elected MPs in the parliament. That is how the value of vote of an MP is different from the value of vote of an MLA. That means population of the state will carry a very important role. And that is how proportional representation system is to be taken into account. In proportion to the population of the state, that will be the value of the vote of an MP or an MLA. You don't have to remember and memorize this formula. I'm just giving you an example, an illustration of how the value of vote of an MLA is different from value of vote of an MP, because there has to be uniformity in a representation of different states at the election of the president. And once we calculate all these votes put together, who is the president of India? Somebody who gets total number of valid votes polled plus the vacancy. What is the vacancy in the office of the president? 1, because we can have only one president. 1 plus 1, 1 plus 1. That means anybody who gets absolute majority of votes will be the next president of India. Let's say if the total number of valid votes polled is 1000. What is the vacancy? 1 plus 1. That means 2. 1000 divided by 2 means 500. Plus 1, that means 501. Anybody bagging more than half of the valid votes polled, and that is absolute majority. That means president is elected by an absolute majority based on proportional representation system. To make it even simpler for you, president is elected by an electoral college. We know who all are the members of this electoral college. In an indirect election, president is elected by the people, but not directly, indirectly. Why indirect election? We also know that. But through a system called proportional representation system. That means we should have a proportional representation system so far as election of the president is concerned. We won't follow first past the post system. Because this president of India should be elected based on the majority votes polled by all members of the electoral college. President of India elected by an electoral college in an indirect election through a system of proportional representation system by means of single transferable vote. But what is the single transferable vote? Let me give you an example. Let's say, for example, this is a ballot paper, and let's assume there are 4 candidates contesting the election. This is candidate, and this is the preference. There is candidate A, candidate B, candidate C, candidate D. Because in presidential election, we don't use electronic voting machines, we use the ballot boxes. Every voter who is the member of the electoral college is given this ballot paper. Ballot paper looks like this. On one hand, you have the name of the candidate, A, B, C, D. On the other hand, you have the preference. So you can give as many preferences as you want. Let's say I'm the voter. My first preference is A. My second preference is D. My third preference is C. My fourth preference is B. And this is given to every single voter. Then one by one, I voted and I dropped this ballot paper in the ballot box. Now these ballot papers will be counted. First thing that will be counted is first preference votes. That means how many people gave first preference to A, how many people gave first preference to B, how many people gave first preference to C, how many people gave first preference to D. These votes will be counted. Whoever got more than 50% of the first preference votes will be the president of India. That means the president of India is elected on the basis of single transferable. That means the president of India is elected by the majority of the votes polled in the electoral college. This individual is the president of India. But what if, for example, when the votes were counted, 40% people gave their first preference to A, 30% people gave first preference to B, 20% people gave first preference to C, and only 10% people gave first preference to D. 40, 70, 90, 100. These are the 100% votes. Who is now the President of India? Nobody. Because nobody got more than 50% of the valid votes polled. In this case, nobody is the President of India. Now, there will be transference of the votes. How? Amongst all these candidates, who got the least number of votes? D. D will be eliminated from the contest. That means D is out of the contest because he got the least number of votes. He is shunted out. But those 10% people who gave first preference to D, who was their second preference? That means these 10% people voted for D as their first preference, but who was their second preference? Because when I filled my ballot paper, I gave first preference to A, but I gave second preference to D, third preference to C, fourth preference to B. These 10% people who voted for D as their first preference, who was their second preference? Let's say 7% of those people who voted for D as their first preference, their second preference was A. And 3% people, their second preference was B. Now in this case, who is the President of India? Nobody. Because now 47% votes are in favor of A, 33% votes are in favor of B, 20% votes are in favor of C. Nobody has crossed this 50% barrier and we don't have a President of India. Now in this case, there will be another round. Which round? Now who got the least number of votes here? C. C will be eradicated from the contest. Now those people, 20% people who gave first preference to C, who was their second preference? Now these second preference votes will be transferred to A and B. Out of them, 10% people voted for A as their second preference and 10% people voted for B as their second preference. That means now 40 plus 10 plus 7. That means 57% people's preference is with A and only 43% people's preference is with B. Now who is the President of India? A is the next President of India because he got 57% of the preference, because he got 57% of the total votes polled in this election. If you look at the beauty of this, the beauty is even if when the first round was counted, first preference votes were counted, even if nobody got the majority, at least in the second counting, we have somebody who has got the majority. Or at least in the third counting, we have got somebody who has got the majority. That means although not everybody favors A, but A is still the second preference or the third preference of the majority of the people of this country. That is why A is the next President of India, if not through consensus, but at least through preference. But one quick fact, we never had to take second counting to determine who is the next President of India, except in 1969 election, when V.V. Giri became the President of India. Apart from 1969 election, at every election, we take the first preference votes, and in this first preference votes, we have the President of India. That means when the first round of counting is over, somebody gets more than 50% of the total valid votes polled, and this person is the next President of India. For example, when Mr. Ramnath Kovind was elected as the President of India, when the votes were counted, 65.65% of the people, their first preference was Mr. Ramnath Kovind, and only 34.35% people, their first preference was Ms. Meera Kumar. So in the first round of counting itself, we had the President of India. That means President of India is elected by an electoral college, second in an indirect election, third through proportional representation system, fourth by means of single transferable vote. That means votes will be transferred, your preference will be transferred, if not votes, but preference will be transferred. And fifth, secret ballot. What is the secret ballot? That means when I'm dropping this ballot paper in the ballot box, I don't have to disclose this vote to anybody. If I disclose this vote to anybody, my vote will be declared as invalid, and then this vote will not be counted. That means this vote should be secretly produced. That means this entire exercise should be conducted in secrecy. When in 2012 presidential election, the Samajwadi Party MP, Mulayam Singh Yadav, he disclosed openly that he's voting for Pranab Mukherjee for the President of India, and ultimately his vote was declared invalid because it violated the secrecy. So secret ballot is very important. You can't disclose your preference while you are placing your ballot paper in the ballot box. This is how the President of India is elected. Now let's say, for example, I am an individual who contested the presidential election, and President is elected by keeping in mind 5 different procedures. Now let's say, for example, the President is now elected. Ramnath Kovind is the President of India. What is his term of office? For how many years will he continue to be in the office of the President of India? Normal tenure is 5 years. But even before completing 5 years, there can arise vacancy in the office of the President of India. How? If the President resigns. How can the President resign? Even before completing his term, President can submit his resignation. And President can resign his office by submitting his resignation to the Vice President of India. That means President can resign from his office even before completing 5 years by submitting his resignation to the Vice President. But one interesting thing, if I'm the President, you are the Vice President, I want to resign. I submit my resignation to you. Is it binding on you to accept my resignation? Can you say, I'm not accepting your resignation, you shall continue to remain the President of India? No. Whenever the President submits his resignation to the Vice President, it is binding on the Vice President to accept that resignation. That can be an important statement for your prelims exam. That means there can arise a vacancy even before 5 years if the President resigns or if the President dies. Because Article 52, there shall be a President of India. If there is a resignation of the President, someone else has to occupy that post. If there is a death in the office of, if there is a death, somebody else has to occupy the post of the President. Or the President can be impeached as well. That means President can be removed from his office. And we'll discuss that procedure slightly later. But whenever there is a vacancy, who will occupy the post of the President of India? The Vice President of India. That means since Article 52 makes it clear there shall be a President of India. That means if there is a resignation of the President, Vice President will act as the President of India. If there is the death of the President, Vice President will act as the President of India. If the President is impeached from his office, Vice President will act as the President of India. But for how long? Till the time new presidential election is conducted and we have a new President in the office. And which should be within a period of 6 months. That means, let's say I resign today, or I am dead today, or I am impeached from my office today. Vice President, you will act as the President of India. But for how long? Till the time there is a new election to the office of the President of India. But this new election should be conducted within a period of 6 months. Within 6 months of my death or my impeachment or my resignation, there should be election conducted by Election Commission of India so that new President is in the office. And till that point in time, you as the Vice President of India will act as the President of India. But while you are acting as the President of India, you will not occupy two posts. That means you will not be Vice President as well as the President. You will only act as the President of India. But two things are very important for your prelims exam. Number one, let's say my term is for 5 years. My 5 years got over today. But even then, Election Commission of India is not in a position to conduct an election of the office of the President of India. Reason can be anything. Maybe it's a period of war. Maybe it's a period of national emergency. Anything. Now, there are two important points that you need to understand from the prelims perspective. Number one, let's say, for example, I am the President of India. My normal term is for 5 years. And 5 years got over today. But even then, election to the President's office has not been conducted. Election Commission has not been in a position to conduct the presidential election. That means we don't have a next President of India. My term got over today, but even then, I don't know who is the next President of India because the election has not been conducted. There can be multiple reasons for that. Maybe there's a period of war. Maybe there's a period of national emergency. Or maybe a terrible catastrophe has befallen us. Hurricane, cyclone, devastating earthquake. Elections have not been conducted. Does that mean that since my term got over now, then the office of President is vacant because there is nobody occupying this post? No. I will continue. That means no matter, unless and until new successor is elected, I will continue to hold my office, even if it means that I am occupying this post beyond a period of 5 years. That is what the statement says. The President shall, notwithstanding the expiration of his term, continue to hold office until his successor enters upon his office. That is something very, very important. Second, I told you that the President submits his resignation to the Vice President. But you are the Vice President. What are you going to do with my resignation? You have to immediately communicate this to the Speaker of the Lok Sabha. This can be another important potential statement for your prelims examination. Now, let's say I'm the President of India. My term is for 5 years. Can I contest the election again? Yes. How many times can I recontest the elections? Any number of times. There is no limit prescribed by the Constitution on the President that you can contest the election only once or only twice or only thrice. There is no upper limit. You can contest elections any number of times to the office of the President of India. In Irish Constitution, for example, there is a limit. Irish Constitution prohibits re-election for more than 2 terms. In United States, for example, you can be a president only for 2 terms. And each term lasts 4 years. For example, George W. Bush was the president of United States for 8 years. 4 years, 4 years, 2 terms. Barack Obama, president of the United States for 2 terms. 4 years, 4 years. Now we have the president of the United States, Donald Trump. He can be the president of the United States for another period of 4 years, but not beyond that, because the Constitution of the United States does not permit re-election more than twice. Now let's look at the qualification. I know that how the president is elected: by an electoral college, indirect election, proportional representation system, single transferable vote, secret ballot. Is there any bar on re-election of the president? No. There can arise a vacancy in the office of the president. That all we know. But what are the qualifications required for somebody so that he can contest the election of the President of India? There are some qualifications that you must possess. There are no educational qualifications, but there are some other qualifications. What are these qualifications? Number one, the citizen of India, universal qualification. Important constitutional offices, important public posts are available only and only to the citizens of this country. So the first qualification, universal qualification, is if you are a citizen of India, then you must have completed completed 35 years of age. That means there is an age limit. There is no upper age limit, but there is a minimum age limit. Minimum, you must have completed 35 years of age and you should be qualified for the election as the member of Lok Sabha. That means if you are qualified to be elected as the member of the Lok Sabha, which means that your name should be mentioned in the voter list in any constituency in this country, you are eligible to contest the election of the President of India. Or should we say, you are qualified to contest the presidential election. What are the qualifications? Number one, citizen of India. And if you're a citizen of India and you have completed 35 years of age and you are eligible to be appointed or to be elected as the member of the Lok Sabha, you are eligible. You are qualified to contest the presidential election. There is also another qualification. You should also not hold any office of profit. And what is this office of profit? We will discuss in detail in our chapter Parliament. Not now, in our chapter Parliament, we will discuss what this office of profit is all about. Because then this office of profit will be relevant for our MPs as well, for our MLAs as well. That is why we will discuss office of profit later. But something you should know right now, you should keep in mind right now, is that there is something called office of profit. And if you're holding an office of profit, you are not qualified to contest the presidential election. Now, let's say, for example, I'm eligible, I'm qualified to contest the presidential election. I contested the election, I won the election. Now, when I won the election, I have to enter into the office of the President of India. Now, before I enter the office of the President of India, I am to be administered oath or affirmation. What is this oath or affirmation? Oath is for believers. I swear in the name of God because I'm a believer. I believe in a particular faith. Affirmation is for atheists who don't believe in God, or agnostic, who are not concerned whether the God exists or not, does not exist. So if you are a believer, you will say, I swear in the name of God. If you are a non-believer, if you are an agnostic, you will say, I solemnly affirm. This is how oath or affirmation is administered to the president. And who administers this oath or affirmation to the president? Chief Justice of India. If Chief Justice of India is not in a position to administer oath or office, maybe Chief Justice of India is not there, is dead, or Chief Justice of India is away because of sickness or because of holiday, whatever it is, then anyone nominated by the Chief Justice of India or the senior most judge of the Supreme Court. That means this oath or affirmation is administered to the president by the Chief Justice of India or the senior most judge of the Supreme Court. But what is mentioned in this oath or affirmation? Something very important. And this oath or affirmation is mentioned under Article 60. When president is administered oath or affirmation by the Chief Justice of India or the senior most judge of the Supreme Court, what he says, I swear in the name of God that I will execute the office of the president. When the oath or affirmation is administered to the president of India, he swears in the name of God, or he solemnly affirms that he will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Something very, very unique for the oath of the president. It's only the president of India who is administered oath, wherein he says that I will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. That is very, very significant so far as the oath of the president is concerned. And once I'm administered oath or affirmation by the Chief Justice of India, I enter into the office of the President of India. I stay there for 5 years. But even before 5 years, there can arise a vacancy if I'm to be removed from my office. And the term used by the Constitution for my removal is impeachment. And remember, this term impeachment is used only and only for the President of India, no one else. So Prime Minister is removed from his office. CAG is removed from his office. Judges of the Supreme Court and High Court removed from their office. Chief Election Commissioner removed from his office. Chairperson of the Union Public Service Commission removed from his office. The only person impeached from his office is the President of India under Article 61 of the Indian Constitution. That means my normal term is for 5 years. But even before 5 years, I can be removed from my office. I can be impeached from my office. And on what grounds? Violation of the Constitution. And what is this violation of the Constitution? We don't know. And for two reasons, we don't know this. Why? Reason number one, the term or this phrase violation of the Constitution has not been defined by the Constitution. That's one thing. That is why we don't know what is this violation of the Constitution, because it has not been defined in the Constitution. Second, till date, no President of India has been impeached from his office. So we don't know what is this violation of the Constitution. But constitutional experts say, let's say Article 74. There shall be Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to aid and advise the President, who shall act on that advice. But President may ask the Council of Ministers to reconsider that advice, but only once. What if even then the President is not accepting the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers? That means he is violating the Constitution. And in this case, he is liable to be impeached from his office. That means President is impeached from his office on the grounds of violation of the Constitution. But this phrase, violation of the Constitution, is not defined in the Constitution. But the process is mentioned. What is the process? This process can either start in Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. This process of impeachment of the President can either start in Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. Let's say, for example, it starts in Lok Sabha. First, 1/4 of the members in Lok Sabha, they must give a notice they must write to the Speaker of the Lok Sabha that we want to impeach the President of India from his office on the grounds of violation of the Constitution. And those charges will be mentioned. What the Speaker will do? Speaker will issue a 14-day notice to the President that there is an impeachment motion pending in the Lok Sabha, introduced in the Lok Sabha by not less than 1/4 of the MPs in Lok Sabha. They want to impeach you from your office. After the expiry of this 14-day period, there will be voting in Lok Sabha. If 2/3 of the members of the total strength of Lok Sabha, they vote in favor of this resolution, then this resolution will be sent to Rajya Sabha. That is very quickly. Let's say, for example, President Ramnath Kovind is to be removed, impeached from his office. This process can either start in Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. Let's assume it started in Lok Sabha. So 1/4 of the total MPs in Lok Sabha will write to the Speaker that, Madam Speaker, these are the charges which clearly explain that President has violated the Constitution. That is why we want to impeach him from his office. Speaker will accept this resolution, and then the Speaker will issue a 14-day notice to the President. At the expiry of this 14-day notice, there will be voting in Lok Sabha. If 2/3 of the total strength or the total membership of the Lok Sabha, they agree with this resolution, then this resolution will be sent to Rajya Sabha. And Rajya Sabha in this case will act as an investigative house. What is this investigative house? That means now Rajya Sabha will investigate these charges. Whatever charges have been mentioned in this resolution, all these charges will be investigated by the Rajya Sabha to prove, to justify whether indeed President has violated the Constitution. And in Rajya Sabha, the President will have the right to defend himself. Either President may defend himself on his own, or President will get his lawyer to defend himself in Rajya Sabha. But in Rajya Sabha also, if the charges sustain, and in Rajya Sabha also, 2/3 of the total strength of the Rajya Sabha, they vote in favor of this resolution, then the President stands impeached from his office. That means President will be removed from his office forthwith, immediately. Or it can be converse. This resolution is introduced in Rajya Sabha. 1/4 of the members of Rajya Sabha, they write to the chairperson of Rajya Sabha that we have to remove the President from his office because he violated the Constitution. If 2/3 of the total membership of the Rajya Sabha agree with this resolution, then this resolution will be sent to Lok Sabha. Now, Lok Sabha in this case will act as an investigative house. Lok Sabha will investigate the charges of violation of the Constitution against the President. President may defend himself or will ask his lawyer to defend himself in Lok Sabha. And if Lok Sabha also passes this resolution by 2/3 of the total membership of the Lok Sabha, then President stands impeached from his office. And till date, no President has been impeached from his office. Now let us look at the powers of the President of India. If you look at all the powers available with the President of India, and we break them down into various heads, we can come up with executive powers of the President of India, legislative powers of the President of India, financial powers, judicial powers, veto powers, and all these powers we shall discuss one by one. But right now, we shall focus only on two categories of powers: executive powers and veto power. Why not legislative, financial, or judicial? Because let's say the legislative power of the President is to promulgate an ordinance. But to understand ordinance, you need to first understand what are the various sessions of Indian Parliament. So unless or until you know about Parliament, you will not be in a position to understand these legislative powers. So these legislative powers we shall discuss when we will discuss the Parliament of India, which is after we are done with Union Executive, then we will take up Union Legislature. And in that chapter, we will discuss legislative powers, financial powers, and judicial powers. We shall discuss along with the governor of a state, because governor also has a judicial power, and we will compare the judicial power available with the governor with that of the President of India. So right now, we will focus on the executive power, veto power, and few other powers available with the President of India. So far as other powers, legislative, financial, judicial are concerned, we will discuss them in our future lectures. What do we mean by the executive power available with the President of India? It has more to do with appointments. For example, appointment of the Prime Minister is the executive power of the President. Appointment of the Council of Ministers is the executive power of the President of India. Similarly, appointment of the chairperson and members of Union Public Service Commission, appointment of Attorney General of India, appointment of governors of the states, appointment of the chairperson and members of the Finance Commission, appointment of the Chief Election Commissioner, appointment of the Comptroller and Auditor General of India. All these appointments are done by the President, and President appoints these individuals on the basis of the powers vested in him, and those powers are what we call executive powers. But here also, the President is a rubber stamp. Except in the appointment of the Prime Minister, which we have discussed in the past, this is where President has slight amount of discretion. Except appointment of the Prime Minister, for all other appointments, President is bound by the aid and advice of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. So no minister can be appointed by the President without the approval of the Prime Minister. Attorney General's name is recommended by the Prime Minister, President only appoints this individual. Similarly, UPSC chairperson and member, CAG, Chief Election Commissioner, election commissioners, all these are recommended by the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers, recommended by the Cabinet, and ultimately President only has a nominal power of issuing the appointment letter. So in executive powers also, we have come to a clear conclusion that President is a mere rubber stamp. The real powers are vested with the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. So this is executive power of the President. And other executive powers we will discuss in our chapter Union Legislature. This is where this concept of executive power will become even more clear. And as I've told you, so far as legislative, financial, judicial, and emergency powers are concerned, we will discuss them in our future lectures. Military powers. President of India is the supreme commander of the Defense Forces of India. That means the combined head of Indian Air Force, Indian Army, and the Navy. The military power of the President is that he can declare war and he can conclude peace as well. But again, President is a rubber stamp. Who ultimately declares war is the Prime Minister. Who has the power to conclude the peace? It's the Prime Minister. But since all executive powers are vested in the office of the President of India, we say that these powers are taken in the name of the President of India. Ultimate accountability, responsibility is that of the President. In reality, the declaration of war or conclusion of the peace agreement is the domain of the Prime Minister and his cabinet. But on paper, all these powers are exercised in the name of the President of India. So far as military powers are concerned, even here, President is a rubber stamp. President has some diplomatic powers as well. What are these diplomatic powers? Let's say, for example, a new ambassador has been appointed by United States to India. When this new ambassador enters India, he makes himself available before the President of India, presents the President of India with his credentials. All what he has done in his previous career, all these credentials are presented by this ambassador to the President of India. That is a diplomatic power available with the President of India. Also, the President visits various countries, but here also only on the advice of the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister can ask the President of India to visit a particular African country or an Asian country because I cannot visit these countries. I have something else to do. You go and visit these countries so that we can have good relationships with these countries. So on the advice of the Prime Minister, the President visits these countries. Or when foreign heads of different governments, they visit India, one of the diplomatic power available with the President is that President will receive these foreign heads. And that is why we see when foreign heads, they come to India, there is a welcome ceremony for them at the Rashtrapati Bhavan in Delhi. That's another diplomatic power that is available with the President. But even here, the President is a rubber stamp. While exercising these powers, it is the Prime Minister. But even here, the President is a mere rubber stamp. While President exercises these diplomatic powers, he cannot do this out of his own discretion. He has to go by the aid and advice of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. Now let us look at veto powers. And we come across three types of veto powers: absolute veto, suspensive veto, and pocket veto. But what is veto? Veto is refusal to give sanction, refusal to give permission. That's what veto is. And what is this veto? Let's say, for example, there is a bill. And what is a bill? Bill is a proposal. Let's say the proposal is, let's hike the salaries of MPs of both houses of the Indian Parliament. Let's hike the salaries of the ministers at the central level. For that, a bill should be passed by the Parliament. Now let's assume this bill is passed by Lok Sabha, then it is passed by Rajya Sabha, then it is given to the President. Unless and until President signs this bill will not be passed. That means the bill should be passed by the Parliament, and Parliament includes Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, as well as the President of India. That means President is an integral part of the Parliament. That means all these three organs, President, Rajya Sabha, Lok Sabha, should pass this bill. Lok Sabha has passed this bill, Rajya Sabha has passed this bill, now this bill is sent to the President. Unless and until President signs this bill will not become an act. That means this law will not enter into force. That means the salaries of the MPs and ministers will not be hiked. What are the options available with the President? Can President refuse that I'm not going to sign this bill? If he does that, that is what we call veto. Article 111 of the Indian Constitution talks about assent to bills. The power available with the President, that you have the right to give assent to bills, to sign on the bills. Constitution lists few provisions. Provision number 1, when a bill is presented to the President of India, either he can give his assent to a bill. That's one option available with the President. You may sign this bill. Second, President may return the bill, except money bill. And what is a money bill? We will discuss in detail in Union Legislature. That means money bill is something which cannot be sent by the President back to the Parliament. Can't be done. For other bills, President may send the bill back. Third, President may withhold the assent. That means there are three options available with the president when a bill is presented to him. Either he may sign this bill. If he signs this bill, the bill becomes a law. The law enters into force. He may return the bill back. That's another option. But the bill should not be a money bill because money bill cannot be sent back by the president to the parliament. Third, president may withhold this bill. President may say, I'm not going to sign this bill. By looking at all these conditions, we come across three types of vetoes available with the president. One is absolute veto. What is this absolute veto? A bill is passed by both houses of the Indian Parliament, Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha. It is presented to the president. President looks at this bill and says, I am withholding my assent to this bill. That means I'm refusing to give assent to this bill. I'm using my veto. I'm not signing this bill. When president withholds his assent to a bill, that is what we call absolute veto. And if president uses an absolute veto, that is the death of the bill. This bill can never become a law. Absolute veto. That means president refusing to sign a bill, the bill is dead. It can never become a law. But then we are faced with a confusion. President has the power that he can withhold his assent to a bill. That's what Constitution says under Article 111. That means president may refuse his assent, president may withhold his assent. I'm not signing this bill, the bill is dead. But on the other hand, we have Article 74 of the Indian Constitution, which talks about there shall be Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to aid and advise the president, who shall act on that advice. Are these two articles in contradiction with each other? They are contrary to each other. On one hand, the president is bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. On the other hand, we are talking about that the bill is presented to the president. The president, while looking at this bill, says, I'm withholding my assent to the bill. I'm not signing this bill. The bill is dead. How are these two in agreement with each other? This is where constitutional experts weigh in. And they say that president can use this absolute veto only in two situations or only when two conditions arise. Condition number one, on the advice of Council of Ministers. That means president can use his absolute veto on the advice of the Council of Ministers. How? Constitutional experts, they envisage a situation, let's say when a private member's bill is passed by the parliament. What is a private member's bill? A bill can be introduced in the parliament by either a minister or a non-minister. Any bill which is introduced by a non-minister is a private member's bill. Let's say this is a private member's bill. Let's assume, for example, that there is a private member in the parliament A. He belongs to the opposition. He introduces a bill in the parliament called Anti-Communal Violence Bill. For example, a bill is introduced in the Lok Sabha, Anti-Communal Violence Bill. This bill is introduced by the opposition member, introduced by a non-minister. That means it's a private member's bill. But in Lok Sabha, as of now, the government is in a minority. Why? That means this bill is introduced by a non-minister, maybe an opposition member. That means it's a private member's bill. This bill talks about the Anti-Communal Violence Bill should be passed in the parliament. Now, as of now, let's assume for a while the government ministers are absent in Lok Sabha. They are busy campaigning in different states in this country. And on this particular day, when this bill is taken up for voting, the government is in a minority because their members are not present. They are not in the majority right now. Their members are busy somewhere. Ministers are busy. Their MPs are busy. And now the opposition is dominant in Lok Sabha right now. And because opposition is dominant, this Anti-Communal Violence Bill is passed in Lok Sabha. And then this bill is sent to Rajya Sabha. And in Rajya Sabha, the government is in a minority. So if government is in a minority in Rajya Sabha, the bill is passed in the Rajya Sabha. Ultimately, it is sent to the president. But the government of the day is against this Anti-Communal Violence Bill. They don't want that such a bill should be passed by the parliament. But if this bill is passed, it is sent to the president. President signs this bill. Ultimately, this bill becomes a law. It is now the responsibility of the government to ensure that this law is in operation. They have to abide by this law, but they don't want to do that because they're against the whole concept of Anti-Communal Violence Bill. In such a situation, when the bill is passed by Lok Sabha, it is passed by Rajya Sabha, it is sent to the president. Now the government is embarrassed because they will now have to implement a law which they are completely against. They will advise the president. Their president use absolute veto. Declare that you are not going to sign this bill. That means the president will use his absolute veto, wherein he declares that I am withholding my assent to the bill. That means I'm not going to sign this bill. I'm using my absolute veto. This Anti-Communal Violence Bill is dead. It can never become a law. So this is how constitutional experts envisage that an absolute veto power can be used by the President of India. That means if President has the power that he can declare, I'm not going to sign this bill. But on top of that, we have Article 74 of Indian Constitution, which says the President shall abide by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. How can these two constitutional provisions coexist simultaneously? Article 74, Article 111. Constitutional experts envisage that such an absolute veto can be used by the President in two situations. Situation number one, on the advice of the Council of Ministers. And situation number two, if the bill is unconstitutional. Now, how can a bill be unconstitutional? Let me give you an example. The year was 1991. On the last working day of Lok Sabha, the Parliament passed a bill to enhance the salaries of MPs. But whenever any bill talks about increase in salaries, because it talks about money, such a bill is a money bill. I will explain money bill in detail later on. But anything, if it is related to money, becomes a money bill. So since this bill talked about increase in the wages, salaries of MPs, such a bill is a money bill. This money bill was passed by the Parliament. But a money bill, before it can be introduced in Lok Sabha, requires previous sanction of the President of India. That means without President allowing a money bill to be tabled in Lok Sabha, this bill cannot be tabled in Lok Sabha. To make it even simpler, there is a bill called a money bill. This bill deals with money matters. What is a money matter? Increase in the salary of MPs. This bill cannot be introduced in Lok Sabha without the previous sanction of the President of India. President should allow that such a bill should be tabled, could be tabled, can be tabled in Lok Sabha. But this bill was not given prior sanction by the President of India. And without President's sanction, this bill was introduced in Lok Sabha, passed by Lok Sabha, passed by Rajya Sabha. When it was presented to the President said, this is a money bill. For a money bill, you require my previous sanction. Since my previous sanction was not sought, this bill is unconstitutional and I'm using my absolute veto on this. That is an absolute veto. So what are we talking about? We're talking about assent to bills. When the bills are passed by both houses of the Indian Parliament, they're sent to the President for approval, for signature, for assent. What are the options available with the President? Number one, President may give his assent. When President gives his assent, that means President signs on this bill, the bill becomes a law. The bill becomes a law, the law is now in operation. Second, President may withhold his assent. President may say, I'm not going to sign this bill. When President declares, I'm not signing this bill, the bill is dead, it can never become a law. But how can he reconcile this absolute veto power of the President with Article 74 of Indian Constitution? Constitutional experts come into the picture. They say that an absolute veto can be employed by the President of India only in two conditions. Condition number one, if the bill is unconstitutional. And I've given you one example. Second, if Council of Ministers themselves are recommend to the President that please use absolute veto. And when President declares, I'm not going to sign this bill, the bill is dead. And this absolute veto can be envisaged when a private member's bill is passed by the Parliament. If it is passed by the Parliament, the government is against this private member's bill, the government can recommend to the President, please use your absolute veto because we don't want this law to enter into force. That is absolute veto. Second is, President may return the bill. And that is what we call suspensive veto. And I'll give you an example. 2006, there was a case of Office of Profit against Jaya Bachchan. Jaya Bachchan was the member of the Parliament belonging to the Samajwadi Party. She was an MP of Rajya Sabha. A case was filed against her that she is a member of Rajya Sabha, but at the same time, she is the chairperson of UP Film Development Corporation. And since a legislator cannot hold an office of profit while being a legislator, and since UP Film Development Corporation chairperson is an office of profit, it was alleged that Ms. Jaya Bachchan should be disqualified from being member of the Rajya Sabha because she's holding an office of profit. And then Jaya Bachchan was disqualified by the President of India on the basis of the report of the Election Commission of India. Election Commission of India, in its report to the President, declared that Jaya Bachchan is indeed holding an office of profit, and as such, she should be disqualified, and she was disqualified. Then afterwards, allegations were leveled against Sonia Gandhi as well, that she is a member of Parliament from Lok Sabha, as well as she is the chairperson of National Advisory Council, and as such, she is holding an office of profit, and as such, she should also be disqualified from being member of Lok Sabha. Then Mrs. Gandhi resigned from her Lok Sabha seat, and then she contested the election again, and she won the election again. But during this time, the Parliament passed a law called Office of Profit Law. But during this time, the Parliament passed a law which was famously called as Office of Profit Law. This law ensured that National Advisory Council post is excluded from the list of Office of Profit. That means even if Mrs. Gandhi is a member of Parliament from Lok Sabha, as well as the chairperson of National Advisory Council, this post, chairperson of National Advisory Council, will not be deemed as an office of profit. That means it is not an office of profit. Even if you are occupying that post, you will not be disqualified from being holding on charges of holding an office of profit. When this bill was passed, it was sent to the President. The President was APJ Abdul Kalam. The President, while looking at this bill, could not understand on what grounds the National Advisory Council post was excluded from the list of Office of Profit. He thought that this bill should not become a law because he thought that this is an immoral law. This is an unreasonable law. This is an unjust law. There is no justification for excluding National Advisory Council posts from the list of Office of Profit. And what he did, when this bill was presented before the President, he returned the bill back. He returned the bill back, and that is what we call he exercised his suspensive veto. But then, when the same bill was passed again without any changes by the Parliament, this time the President of India had no other option but to sign this bill. That means now we have a third option. When a bill is presented to the President, one option, he gives his assent to the bill. Second option, he declares, I'm not signing this bill. He withholds his assent to a bill. Third, he sends the bill back. But he can send the bill back only once. If the same bill is passed again by the Parliament, sent to the President, this time the President has no other option but to give his assent to the bill to sign on this bill. And at that point in time, it took 16 days for President APJ Abdul Kalam to sign on the bill once it was sent back by the Parliament after passing it again. And at that point in time, there was huge speculation that perhaps APJ Abdul Kalam would resign from the office of the President of India because he does not want such a bill to be passed. Later on, he writes in his autobiography that as the President, I had limited power. I ventilated my anger. I ventilated that I'm not in favor of such a bill by sending the bill back, but only once I could have done that. When the same bill was presented to me again, I had no other option but to sign on this bill. That is what we call suspensive veto. There's another veto that comes into picture, and that is pocket veto. How? When a bill is presented to the President, he has two options. He can give his assent to a bill. He may refuse assent to a bill. That means he withholds his assent to a bill, or he may send the bill back if it is not a money bill. But if you look at all these conditions, there is no time period that within 10 days, 14 days, 30 days, the President should say, I'm not signing this bill. Within 10 days, 7 days, 15 days, the President should declare that I'm sending this bill back. Within 10 days, 20 days, the President should sign this bill. There is no time limit prescribed in the Constitution for the President within which the President should declare whether he's signing this bill, not signing this bill, sending the bill back. This was a loophole that was employed by President Gyani Zail Singh in 1986. Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister. A bill was passed by the Parliament which significantly curtailed freedom of speech and expression. It was some sort of a telegraph bill was passed by the Parliament. And this bill met with stiff resistance from the press, particularly Indian Express. This bill was heavily criticized by the media because it curbed freedom of speech and expression, particularly of the media. And when this bill was sent to the President for a signature, Gyani Zail Singh at that point in time, there was a deterioration in relationship between Gyani Zail Singh and Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. Gyani Zail Singh hit upon an idea that Constitution does not prescribe time limit for me within which I have to take this decision. So he kept the bill in his pocket. That is what we call pocket veto. That means neither did he sign this bill, that means he did not give his assent to the bill, nor did he declare that I'm not signing this bill, because then it would have amounted to a clash with the Council of Ministers. If the Council of Ministers would have recommended to him that you please sign this bill, and if you go against that advice, you are liable for impeachment. Neither did he send the bill back, because if he would have sent the bill back to the Parliament for reconsideration, then if the Parliament would have passed the same bill again, the President had no other option but to sign this bill. What he did, he kept the bill lying on his desk, or he kept the bill lying in his pocket. He did not act on this bill at all. And that is what we call pocket veto. Do not act on that bill whatsoever. And then the successor of Gyani Zail Singh, President Venkatraman, when he saw the bill lying on his desk, he sent the bill back. But this time, he sent the bill back to the Cabinet. and not the parliament. The National Front government was in power, headed by VP Singh. This VP Singh government decided to drop this bill, and ultimately this bill could not be introduced again in the parliament. This is what we call three different types of vetoes: absolute veto, suspensive veto, pocket veto. Maybe this is something that you didn't understand fully. Let me recap it for you. Pocket veto. Since Constitution does not prescribe the time limit within which the president should decide whether you are signing this bill or sending the bill back or returning this bill for reconsideration, what Gyani Zail Singh, the president of India, did, he kept the bill lying in his pocket on his desk without taking any action on that bill. And then Gyani Zail Singh's tenure got over. New president was sworn in. The new president, when he saw the bill lying on his desk, what he did, he sent the bill back. But normally the bill is sent back to the parliament. But this time the president, what he did, he sent the bill back to the cabinet. And the cabinet headed by VP Singh decided to drop this bill. The bill was dropped. It never was reintroduced in the parliament. That is what we call the pocket veto. There is another veto called qualified veto. But this qualified veto is not available with the president of India. It is available with the president of United States of America. For United States of America, let's assume this is Donald J. Trump, the president of United States of America. A bill is presented to Donald Trump, and Donald Trump has to either sign on this bill or reject this bill or whatever. Let's say this bill is passed by simple majority. If this bill is passed by simple majority, it is sent to the president for signature. President sends the bill back. Similar to suspensive veto available with the president of India. If the same bill is passed again by simple majority and sent to the president of India, it is not mandatory. It is not binding on the president to sign this bill. But in case of India, it is binding on the president to sign the bill if the same bill is sent back by the parliament again. But in this case, it is not binding on the president of the United States to sign this bill. But now, if this bill is now passed by the parliament by a higher majority, maybe by effective majority or maybe by special majority, that means now the bill is passed by a higher majority and then this bill is sent to the president for signature. He has no other option but to sign this bill. That means the president's veto has now been qualified by a higher majority. What are we talking about? Veto powers. Veto is something where you refuse to give the permission. For president of India, there are three types of vetoes available: absolute veto, suspensive veto, pocket veto. Although pocket veto is not mentioned in the Constitution, but it was an innovation. By looking at that, there is no time limit prescribed by the Constitution when the president should sign or return the bill back. Gyani Zail Singh kept the bill lying in his pocket or his desk. That is what we call pocket veto. But there is fourth type of veto, not available with the president of India, but available with the president of United States of America. In United States of America, let's say for example, I'm Parliament. You are the president. I passed a bill. I've sent this bill to you. You have decided to return this bill back to me. But this bill originally was passed by simple majority. If I will pass this bill again by simple majority, I will present it to you. You don't have any legal binding that you should sign this bill. You may again refuse to sign this bill. But now, since this bill was passed for the first time by simple majority, now what the president has done, he has sent the bill back to the parliament for reconsideration. Now this time, parliament is passing this bill by a higher majority, by a special majority in this case, and then this bill is sent to the president. He has no other option but to sign this bill because your veto has now been qualified by a higher majority with which this bill has now been passed by the parliament. That is what we call qualified veto. But this qualified veto is available only with the president of the United States of America, not with the president of India. That is what you need to understand from this chapter, President of India. We have talked about who can be the president of India, what are the qualifications required, how the election takes place, what is proportional representation system, what is single transferable vote, what is secret ballot. Then we talked about oath, we talked about the powers available with the president, and we discussed two powers in slight detail. One is the veto power and the other is the executive power of the president of India. Now let us look at the office of the Vice President of India. Vice President of India is part of the Union Executive, and this topic is primarily relevant for your prelims examination. It is not of much relevance so far as your mains examination is concerned. And here we will talk about the qualifications, the election, the term, the functions, and the role of the Vice President of India. And at the end, we will compare the office of the Vice President of India with the office of the Vice President of the United States of America. Article 63 talks about there shall be a Vice President of India. But the Constitution of India talks about only two functions so far as the Vice President of India is concerned. Number one, he is the ex officio chairman of Council of States. That means he is the ex officio chairperson of Rajya Sabha. But what is it that we say? But what do we mean by ex officio? Let's say, for example, M. Venkaiah Naidu is the chairperson of Rajya Sabha. But M. Venkaiah Naidu is not the chairperson of Rajya Sabha because he is M. Venkaiah Naidu. But he is the chairperson of Rajya Sabha because he is the Vice President of India. That means anybody holding the post of Vice President of India, because he holds that office, because of that office, he or she becomes the chairperson of Rajya Sabha as well, Council of States. That means Constitution has prescribed two roles for the Vice President of India. Role number one, he is the ex officio chairperson of Rajya Sabha. That means by virtue of holding the office of Vice President, M. Venkaiah Naidu is the chairperson of Rajya Sabha. And what is the role of the chairperson of Rajya Sabha? To conduct the business of Rajya Sabha. To see that the business is carried out in Rajya Sabha according to the rules and the procedures. To check if the business of the House is carried out according to the rules and the procedure of the Rajya Sabha. That means maintaining decorum in the House, conducting the proceedings of the House. That is the role of the chairperson of Rajya Sabha. That means whatever is the role of the Speaker of Lok Sabha, that is the role of the chairperson of Rajya Sabha. And who is the chairperson of Rajya Sabha? Vice President of India. Ex officio chairperson of Rajya Sabha is the Vice President of India. And as the chairperson of Rajya Sabha, the role of M. Venkaiah Naidu is like the role of the Speaker of Lok Sabha, which primarily means asking the members of the parliament not to shout out each other, not to lift tables and throw at each other, maintaining discipline in the Rajya Sabha. That is the role of the chairperson of Rajya Sabha. That is one role. That is one role according to the Constitution for the Vice President of India is by virtue of holding the office of the Vice President of India, this individual is also the chairperson of Rajya Sabha. And second, in absence of the president, or whenever there is vacancy in the office of the president, the Vice President of India acts as the President of India. That means whenever there is vacancy in the office of the President of India, Vice President acts as the President of India. That is another role available to the Vice President according to the Constitution. But one important thing, when Vice President is acting as the President of India, in that case, he shall not perform the duties of the Chairman of the Council of the States. That duty will be performed by someone else. How? We're talking about Vice President of India. Constitution has listed two roles for the Vice President of India. Number one, you are the chairperson of the Council of States. Number two, when there is a vacancy in the office of the President, you will act as the President of India. And if I am the Vice President of India, there is a vacancy in the office of the President. I will now act as the President of India, but I will also be administered oath or affirmation of the office of the President. That means I will be administered oath or affirmation that I will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. So if I'm acting as the President of India, I will not discharge my duties as the chairperson of the Council of States. That duty someone else will perform. Deputy chairperson of Rajya Sabha, someone else will perform, but not you, because you are now the President of India, acting President of India. These are the only two roles prescribed by the Constitution for the Vice President of India. And although the Constitution does not talk about it, but Vice President of India is also the chairman of Rajya Sabha television. But that is something the Constitution does not talk about. Constitution has prescribed only two roles for the Vice President of India: discharge the duties of the President of India when there is a vacancy, and second, discharge the duties of the chairman or the chairperson of Rajya Sabha. But how is the Vice President of India elected? Vice President of India is also elected by the Electoral College. But this time the Electoral College changes. So far as the Electoral College of the President is concerned, there we have seen that the Electoral College consists of the elected members of both houses of the Indian Parliament, elected members of the state legislative assemblies, and elected members of the Legislative Assembly of Delhi and Puducherry. So far as the Electoral College of Vice Presidential election is concerned, it consists of the members of both houses of the Indian Parliament. That means members of both Rajya Sabha as well as Lok Sabha. That means members nominated as well as elected members of both Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha, they form the Electoral College. That means they vote for the election of the Vice President of India. Why this difference in the Electoral College? B.R. Ambedkar explained. The chairman of the drafting committee of Indian Constitution, B.R. Ambedkar, said that if you look at the President of India, his powers extend even to the states. That is why, so far as the election of the President is concerned, the state legislature should also have a role. But so far as Vice President is concerned, what is his role? His role is to preside over the sessions of Rajya Sabha. That means his role is not extended to the states. That is why states should not be involved in his election. Only the members of both Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha should decide who is the next Vice President of India. That means Vice President of India is also elected by the people, but indirectly. Indirectly by the members of the Electoral College, which includes members of both houses of the Indian Parliament. How? Through the system of proportional representation system, by means of single transferable vote, as well as through secret ballot. That means everything else, what is applicable to the President is applicable to the Vice President as well, except the fact that the Electoral College changes. Electoral College for the President is much wider because states are also involved, but the Electoral College of the Vice President only includes members of both houses of the Indian Parliament. But who can contest the Vice Presidential election? What are the qualifications required for someone to contest the Vice Presidential election? Number one, universal qualification, and that is citizen of India, must have completed 35 years of age. But what was the qualification for somebody to contest the presidential election? That individual should have been eligible to be elected to the Lok Sabha. But so far as Vice President is concerned, another qualification is you should be qualified as a member of Council of States. That means Rajya Sabha. Anybody who is qualified to become a member of Rajya Sabha is qualified to contest the Vice Presidential election as well. But you have to understand that Vice President of India is not a member of Rajya Sabha. He only presides over Rajya Sabha. That is why we say he is ex officio chairperson of Rajya Sabha. That means despite the fact that he is not member of Rajya Sabha, even then he is the chairperson of Rajya Sabha by virtue of his office. And what is that office? Vice President. So what are the qualifications required? Number one, citizen of India. Number two, must have completed 35 years of age. Number three, should be qualified to be elected as a member of Rajya Sabha. And at the same time, you should also not be holding any office of profit. And what is this office of profit? We shall discuss in Indian Parliament. Now, what is the term of office for Vice President? Normally it is for 5 years. And even before completing 5 years, there can arise a vacancy. Resignation. That means Vice President may resign. If I'm the Vice President, I can submit my resignation to you. And who are you? The President of India. That means Vice President of India and the President of India, they resign from their offices by submitting their resignations to each other. Vice President sends resignation to the President, President sends resignation to the Vice President, and when the Vice President submits his resignation to the President, it is binding on the President to accept that resignation. The President cannot refuse to accept this resignation. That's a very important point for your prelims. Second, Vice President can also be removed from his office. How? We'll discuss slightly later. Third, there may be the death of the Vice President of India. And because of resignation, removal, and death, there arises a vacancy in the office of the Vice President of India. Who fills this vacancy? In that case, the office of Vice President is so important that it can remain vacant as well. That means Constitution does not talk about whenever there's a vacancy in the office of the Vice President, immediately it needs to be filled. No, it can remain vacant till the time new election to the Vice President is conducted by the Election Commission, which will be done within 6 months. How? There's a vacancy in the office of the President. But our Constitution says we cannot envisage a situation. We cannot envisage that a constitutional scheme will run, even for a short duration, without somebody holding the office, occupying the office of the President of India. But so far as Vice President is concerned, this office can remain vacant as well. That means there's a vacancy in the office of the Vice President, it needs to be filled. Election should be conducted within 6 months. But for this 6 month period, who will occupy the post? Who will occupy the position of the Vice President of India? Need not be filled. Why? What is the role of Vice President? To discharge the duties of the chairperson of Rajya Sabha, that is to preside over the sessions of Rajya Sabha, for that we have deputy chairperson. This deputy chairperson will preside over the sessions of the Rajya Sabha. We do not need a Vice President immediately. There will be elections to the Vice President, which will be conducted by the Election Commission within 6 months, but this office can remain vacant as well. Now let's look at this differently. I'm qualified to contest the election of the Vice President of India. I contested the election, I won the election. Now I have to occupy the post of the Vice President of India. But before occupying this post of the Vice President of India, I will be administered oath or affirmation. And who will administer oath or affirmation to me? The President of India. But what is mentioned in this oath is very important. And that is mentioned in Article 69. President of India is administered oath wherein he swears that I'm going to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. That's for the President of India. But so far as Vice President of India is concerned, it's a very simple oath. It only talks about that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office about which I'm to enter. It simply says I will faithfully discharge the duty upon which I am about to enter. That is what Article 69 talks about. So President is not administered oath or affirmation wherein he has to say that I'm going to defend the Constitution. No, I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office about which I'm to enter. And there's Article 70. Again, you don't have to memorize these articles, but for the sake of continuity, I'm providing you the article number as well. Article 70 talks about discharge of President's functions in other contingencies. Let's look at this differently. If President of India is occupying the post, but there is now a vacancy in the office of the President because of resignation, because of death, because of impeachment, but this post cannot remain vacant. This post will now be occupied by the Vice President of India for a temporary period. That means still there is an election to the office of the President of India. Where is it mentioned? It's mentioned in the Constitution. But what if there is a vacancy in the office of the President? There is vacancy in the office of the Vice President as well. What will happen? Who will occupy the post of the President of India? Who will discharge the duties of the President of India? Constitution was silent on this matter. Then what happened? 1969, the sudden death of the President, Dr. Zakir Hussain. His deputy was D.D. Giri. He acted as the President of India for some time, but then he decided I want to contest the presidential election and I will resign from the post of the Vice President of India. While he was the Vice President of India, the Parliament enacted a law called President Discharge of Functions Act 1969. According to this act, if there is a vacancy in the office of the President, who will occupy that post? Vice President. If there is a vacancy in the office of the Vice President as well, in that case, the President's functions will be discharged by Chief Justice of India. If there is a vacancy in the office of the Chief Justice of India as well, then who will discharge the duties of the President of India? Senior most judge of the Supreme Court. That is what this President Discharge of Functions Act 1969 talks about. That means Constitution talks about there's a vacancy in the office of the President, Vice President will act as the President of India. After that, nothing else is mentioned. But this 1969 law talks about the succession plan. If there's a vacancy in the office of the President, Vice President will act as the President of India. If here also there's a vacancy, Chief Justice of India will act as the President of India. If there's a vacancy even here, then Senior most judge of the Supreme Court will act as the President of India. Now what does Article 71 talk about? Now, President of India got elected, Vice President of India got elected. Now somebody comes up with a claim. Somebody disputes the election of the President and the Vice President. That means there is an election petition to be filed. Such an election petition can only be filed in the Supreme Court. That means in no other high court can such a petition be filed, and the decision of the Supreme Court shall be final. How? Let me give you an example. Pranab Mukherjee contested the presidential election in 2012 against Mr. Salma. And Mr. Salma was the opposition candidate, but then there was a dispute on the election of Pranab Mukherjee as the president of India. Mr. Salma alleged that Pranab Mukherjee was also a part of Indian Statistical Institute when he contested the presidential election. And since he's holding the office of prophet, his election should be declared null and void. And I should be declared as the president of India. Such a case, because it involves dispute on the election of the president, if there is a dispute arising out of the election of the president or the vice president of India, such a case can only be filed in the Supreme Court, and the decision of the Supreme Court shall be final. That means this case cannot be filed anywhere else. Now let's compare the Vice President of the United States and Vice President of India. The post of the Vice President of India is modeled on the lines of the post of the Vice President of the United States of America. But there's one distinction, there's one difference. What is the difference? In the United States, Vice President is also the head of the Senate. That means the upper house of the US Parliament or US Congress. And in India also, Vice President is the chairperson of the upper house of Indian Parliament, which is Rajya Sabha. What happens? If President of India, there's a vacancy in the office of the President of India. Who acts as the President of India? Vice President. For what duration? Till the time election to the President is over. That means till the successor is appointed. That means till the successor is elected. And this process should be completed within 6 months. That's what the Constitution says. That means if there is a vacancy in the office of the President of India, Vice President acts as the President of India. Till the time there is an election to the office of the President, which should be completed, which should be conducted by the Election Commission within a period of 6 months. But what about the United States of America? Let's say Donald Trump is the President of the United States of America and Mike Pence is the Vice President of the United States of America. The term of Donald Trump is for 4 years. Let's assume for a while that Donald Trump dies or is impeached or he resigns after 1 year. Then Vice President Mike Pence will act as the President of the United States of America for the remainder of the term. That means for 3 years. How to make it even simpler? Donald Trump, President for 4 years. Under President for 4 years. After 1 year, he decides to resign. The Vice President will act as the President of the United States. How long? Remainder of the term. Total term is 4 years. Minus 1 year. That is 3 years. That means for 3 years, Mike Pence will continue and act as the President of the United States of America. But in India, it is different. The Vice President of India will act as the President of India for a maximum duration of 6 months, till the successor is elected after the elections are conducted by the Election Commission of India. Now, there's only one issue that we have to discuss regarding the office of the Vice President, that is related to the removal of Vice President of India. How the Vice President of India is removed? Number one, what are the grounds on which Vice President of India is removed from his office? Not mentioned in the Constitution. Very important statement so far as prelims is concerned. If the President can be impeached from his office on the grounds of violation of the Constitution. What are the grounds mentioned in the Constitution for the removal of the Vice President of India? Not mentioned in the Constitution. But the procedure is mentioned. What's the procedure mentioned? Under Article 67, Clause B, the Vice President of India can be removed on the basis of a resolution passed by Rajya Sabha. That means the members of the Rajya Sabha, they pass a resolution, and this resolution should be passed by effective majority. We have discussed initially what is this effective majority. A resolution is passed by the Rajya Sabha by effective majority. If this resolution is passed by Rajya Sabha, then Vice President of India will be removed from his office. This resolution should only be agreed upon by Lok Sabha. So there are 2-3 points that I have to mention here. Number one, your book M. Lakshmikant talks about that Vice President is removed from his office on the basis of special majority resolution. That's wrong. Incorrect. The majority required is effective majority. That's number one. Number two, what is the process? Let me explain it briefly. I'm the Vice President of India. Rajya Sabha members, they want that I should be removed from my office. On what grounds? Not mentioned in the Constitution. Second important detail. Third, 14-day notice should be given to me that we want you to be removed from your office. After the expiry of this 14-day period, a resolution should be passed in Rajya Sabha by effective majority. And if this resolution is passed by effective majority, then this resolution should be accepted upon or agreed upon by Lok Sabha. That means Lok Sabha can pass a resolution by simple majority, and Vice President is removed from his office. That means no formal impeachment is required. In impeachment, the other house has to investigate the charges. Here in this case, no investigation is required. That means the Vice President can be removed from his office based on the resolution passed by Rajya Sabha by effective majority. And this resolution should be agreed upon by Lok Sabha. That is all that you need to know regarding the office of Vice President of India, relevant primarily so far as your prelims is concerned.
Now, till now, we have discussed the office of the President of India and the Vice President of India. Now, we shall discuss in this lecture the office of the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, or should we say, Council of Ministers. I told you that President is the head of the state. The head of the government is the Prime Minister of India. If the President is the first citizen of this country, if all the executive powers are vested in the name of the President of India, but he cannot exercise these powers without the aid and advice of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. So that means Prime Minister is the real head of the government. President is only a constitutional head or the nominal head of the government. If President is the de jure head of the state, the de facto head of the state is the Prime Minister of this country. That means the law says that President has all the powers, because that's what de jure means. But by the fact that President cannot exercise these powers without the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister, that means de facto, by the fact itself, it is the Prime Minister who is the real executive in this country. Real executive, Prime Minister, nominal executive, the President of India. And why is that? Because we follow parliamentary form of democracy. And in parliamentary form of democracy, it is the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister which has got the real powers and not the President of India. And our parliamentary democracy is modelled along the lines of the British constitutional scheme. That means our constitution provides for a parliamentary form of government which is modelled on the British pattern. And what is this parliamentary form of democracy? Parliamentary form of democracy means Council of Ministers is responsible to Lok Sabha. And I'll explain how. We have two houses of Indian Parliament. Upper House, Rajya Sabha, lower house, Lok Sabha. For any government to continue, for any government to survive, this government must enjoy majority in Lok Sabha. And which type of majority are we talking about? Simple majority. But even if the government does not enjoy majority in Rajya Sabha, that doesn't matter. The government will still survive. The government will still perform. That's what parliamentary form of government is all about. Parliamentary form of government means Council of Ministers are responsible to Lok Sabha. They are accountable to Lok Sabha. If the Council of Ministers enjoy majority in Lok Sabha, they will continue. Otherwise, they have no other option but to resign from their office. What does Constitution say about the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers? When we discuss the office of President, I told you that there is something called Article 74 of Indian Constitution. Article 74 says there shall be Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to do what? To aid and advise the President. But in the original Constitution, it was not mentioned whether the aid and advice of the Prime Minister is binding on the President or not. Then 42nd Amendment was done to the Constitution in the year 1976. And the amended Article 74 now reads, who shall act according to that advice. That means now whatever advice is tendered by the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to the President, President shall have to act on that advice. But then in 1978, another amendment was done. Another amendment was made to Article 74. Now President may refer the matter back. President may ask the Prime Minister to reconsider that advice. But if the same advice is given again, President has no other option but to accept that advice. That means it becomes abundantly clear. President is a rubber stamp in Indian constitutional scheme, and the real power is with the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. But now let's look at how the Prime Minister of India is appointed. Is the Prime Minister of India directly elected by the people? No. Then how is the Prime Minister of India appointed? People vote in large numbers in Lok Sabha elections. They vote in favor of various political parties and then they elect their representatives to Lok Sabha. And now we have a Lok Sabha which has 543 MPs. These 543 MPs will decide who should be the next Prime Minister of this country. That's how theoretically the Prime Minister is appointed. That means theoretically, Prime Minister is appointed from one amongst these 543 MPs. Whichever individual commands majority in Lok Sabha, that individual shall be appointed as the Prime Minister of this country. But when you look at the Constitution of India, Constitution only talks about that the Prime Minister shall be appointed by the President. That's all. Nothing more, nothing less. Prime Minister shall be appointed by the President. That's the only thing Constitution of India talks about. That is the first step after the elections are over. When 543 MPs have been elected by the people of this country, the first step is the appointment of the Prime Minister. That's the first step in the formation of the government. Because once Prime Minister is appointed, then on the advice of the Prime Minister, other members of the Council of Ministers can be appointed by the President. That means first step is the appointment of the Prime Minister. And who this Prime Minister is, that's the discretion of the President of India. But I told you before, that does not mean Prime Minister can appoint anybody as the Prime Minister. In theory and in practice, normally the President appoints the leader of the party which won the election, which won simple majority in Lok Sabha. If there is no single party which won simple majority in Lok Sabha, then there has to be a coalition. 4, 5, 6, 10, 16 parties will come together, they will decide upon a name, and this individual shall be appointed as the Prime Minister. That means if no party is in a position to form the government on its own, there will be a coalition government. And then the coalition parties will decide who will be the Prime Minister. And this name, once it is recommended to the President, this individual shall be appointed as the Prime Minister by the President of India. For example, the year was 2004. The elections were over, no political party was in a position to command simple majority in Lok Sabha. That means no political party was in a position to bag 272 plus seats, which is a simple majority out of 543 MPs. Then what happened? More than 10, 15 political parties, they came together and they chose the name of Dr. Manmohan Singh. This name was recommended to the President APJ Abdul Kalam, and Dr. Manmohan Singh was sworn in by the President as the Prime Minister of this country. 10 years later in 2014, riding on the Modi wave, the BJP bagged 282 seats on its own. That means there was no need of a coalition government. And who was the leader chosen by these 282 MPs to be appointed as the Prime Minister? Narendra Modi. And Narendra Modi's name was recommended to the President Pranab Mukherjee, and Mr. Modi was sworn in as the Prime Minister of India. That means although the Constitution says that the Prime Minister shall be appointed by the President, yes, President has the discretion that he can appoint anybody as the Prime Minister. But then this individual shall have to prove his majority on the floor of the Lok Sabha. If this individual is in a position to cobble up a majority on the floor of the Lok Sabha, this individual can continue. If not, then he has no other option but to resign. And a new Prime Minister shall be appointed by the President. But this discretionary power of the President can be best explained in a scenario where there is no political party which is in a position to form the government on its own, and no group of parties or no coalition also is in a position to form the government. Then in that case, the President has a discretion. He can choose anybody as the Prime Minister, and then this individual will have to prove his majority on the floor of the Lok Sabha. But this Prime Minister, should he or she be from Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha? Prime Minister can be either from Lok Sabha or he can be from Rajya Sabha. For example, Prime Minister Modi is from Lok Sabha. Dr. Manmohan Singh for 10 years was the Prime Minister of this country, but he belonged to upper house of the Indian Parliament, Rajya Sabha. Or there can be a situation where this individual A is neither a member of Lok Sabha nor a member of Rajya Sabha. Even then, this individual can be appointed as the Prime Minister. That means me, I'm neither a member of Rajya Sabha nor Lok Sabha. The President may invite me that I will swear you in as the Prime Minister of this country. He can do that. Please do. But then within 6 months, I shall have to get myself elected to either Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha. That means the President can appoint anyone as the Prime Minister. Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, even if you are not a member of the Parliament, even then you can be appointed as the Prime Minister, but then you have to become a member of either house of Indian Parliament within a period of 6 months. If you cannot be elected to either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha within a period of 6 months, then you have no other option but to resign. And once the Prime Minister is appointed, then on the advice of the Prime Minister, other Council of Ministers are appointed by the President. And here, President does not have any discretion. That means President cannot appoint anybody as the Minister if this name is not recommended by the Prime Minister. So far as appointment of the Prime Minister is concerned, President may have a discretion. But so far as the appointment of ministers is concerned, President has no discretion whatsoever. Whichever name is recommended by the Prime Minister to the President as the Minister, this individual shall be appointed. Nothing more, nothing less. Few important points. The advice tendered by the Council of Ministers to the President shall not be inquired into any court of law. That means in Article 74 of the Indian Constitution, I told you that it shall be the duty of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister to aid and advise the President. But whatever aid and advice is given to the President by the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers, this cannot be inquired into in any court of law. That means the court will never ask the President, please show us what advice was given to you by the Council of Ministers. What advice was given to you by the Prime Minister? Whatever advice is tendered by the Council of Ministers to the President cannot be inquired into any court of law. That means in this matter, there can be no judicial review. Another important point, the Council of Ministers are collectively responsible to Lok Sabha. And I'll explain slightly later what do we mean by collective responsibility. A third important point, there is no provision in the Constitution which makes President responsible to the Parliament for the acts of the government. Individual ministers are responsible. Ministers can be responsible to the Parliament. Ministers are accountable to the Lok Sabha. But a President cannot be held accountable for any act done by the government. Prime Minister is responsible, ministers are responsible, but under the Constitution of India, there exists no provision whatsoever which makes President responsible to the Parliament for the acts of the government. But what should be the strength of the Council of Ministry? Initially, there was no limit. There could have been a Prime Minister and hundreds of other ministers. There was no limit. But then a limit was imposed when Constitution was amended in 2003, 91st Constitutional Amendment Act, and this Constitutional Amendment Act has now prescribed a limit that including the Prime Minister, the strength of the Council of Ministers shall not exceed 15% of the total members of Lok Sabha. That means Prime Minister plus Council of Ministers. Their strength cannot be more than 15% of the strength of Lok Sabha. And this applies even for state governments as well. The strength of the Council of Ministers, including the Chief Minister, shall not exceed 15% of the Legislative Assembly. And even states, the minimum number of ministers, including the Chief Minister, is fixed at 12. But there are some states, smaller states such as Mizoram, Goa, the minimum number of ministers is fixed at 7, and the maximum it can go up to is 15% of the strength of Legislative Assembly. But so far as Delhi is concerned, this percentage is fixed at 10% of the strength of the Legislative Assembly. And when we will discuss union territories, there I'll tell you the reason behind this. If there was no limit on the strength of the Council of Ministry, then the Council of Ministry would have been very huge. Because today, if I'm an MP, I'm still not satisfied. My hunger dictates me that I should be a minister as well. If everybody is claiming for a minister's post, if everybody is forcing the Prime Minister to appoint him as a minister, then we will have a large list of people who will be ministers, and then it would be a huge drain on state exchequer. Salaries to these ministers, bungalows to these ministers, other expenses for these ministers' offices. It will be a huge drain on the state exchequer. That is why in 2003, under the Prime Ministership of Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Constitution was amended, and a limit was imposed on the strength or the composition of the Council of Ministers. And the composition is Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers shall not exceed 15% of the strength of Lok Sabha. Few important points again. The minister shall hold office during the pleasure of the President. That means what is the tenure of a minister? Not mentioned in the Constitution. The ministers can continue in their offices so long as they enjoy the pleasure of the President. But it is not the personal pleasure of the President. It is the pleasure of the Prime Minister. So far as minister enjoys the pleasure of the Prime Minister, he will continue. If not, then the Prime Minister will either ask this minister to submit the resignation, or if he does not submit the resignation, the Prime Minister may ask the President to remove this minister from the list of Council of Ministry. That is what we call doctrine of pleasure. And before a minister enters upon his office, oath or affirmation is administered to this minister by the president. And this oath is of two types: oath of office as well as oath of secrecy. And this oath of office and secrecy is mentioned in the third schedule. When we will discuss the schedules of Indian Constitution, I will tell you the difference between the oath of office for a minister and oath of secrecy for a minister. But for the current discussion, if my name is recommended to the president by the prime minister, then I should be appointed as a minister. Before I can enter into my office, I am administered oath of office and secrecy by the president of India. But what if I'm neither a member of Lok Sabha nor a member of Rajya Sabha? Can I still be appointed as a minister? Yes. But within a period of 6 months, I should get elected to either Lok Sabha or Rajya Sabha. Any minister who for any period of 6 consecutive months is not a member of either house of the parliament, he shall cease to be a minister. Let's say, for example, Manohar Parrikar. He was a chief minister of Goa, but then he was brought to the centre. He was not a member of Rajya Sabha or Lok Sabha, but he was brought to the centre. He was administered oath of office and secrecy by the president, and he was appointed as the defense minister of this country, despite the fact that he was neither a member of Lok Sabha nor Rajya Sabha. Later on, he got elected to Rajya Sabha and he continued as the defense minister. Then he resigned from defense ministry, went back to Goa and became the chief minister of Goa, and unfortunately passed away some time ago. Similarly, Suresh Prabhu, he was neither a member of Lok Sabha nor Rajya Sabha, but he was sworn in by the president of India as the minister, and later on he became a member of the parliament from Rajya Sabha. Another important point: the salaries and allowances of the ministers shall be such as the parliament may from time to time by law determine. That means parliament will have to frame a law to determine the salary and allowances of the ministers, and shall be specified for the time being in second schedule. But this is the Constitution of 1950. 1950 Constitution said that till the time parliament frames a law to decide the salaries and allowances of the ministers, we will mention their salaries in the second schedule. But now parliament has framed a law, and there's a huge dispute whether parliamentarians or ministers should decide their own salary, or there should be an independent entity to decide the salary of the legislators and the ministers. That we will discuss when we will discuss the schedules of Indian Constitution. But now let's compare two important concepts: collective responsibility and individual responsibility. Collective responsibility means that Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers, they are collectively responsible to Lok Sabha. What does that mean? That means Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers, if they command majority in the Lok Sabha, they will continue to operate. If they lose majority in Lok Sabha, they have no other option but to resign. Another implication of collective responsibility is, what if, let's say, Prime Minister dies or Prime Minister resigns? Resignation or the death of the Prime Minister means resignation and death of the entire Council of Ministers. That means Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers, they swim and sink together. The resignation of the Prime Minister or the death of the Prime Minister means the death of the entire Council of Ministers. That means if the entire Council of Ministers will have to resign, it's not necessary for all these ministers to send individual resignations to the President. Only the Prime Minister will submit the resignation, and that would mean the resignation of the entire Council of Ministers as well. Now let's look at the third implication of collective responsibility. When I told you Council of Ministers swim and sink together, what does that mean? Let's say, for example, there's a Minister A, and against this Minister A, a motion has been passed by the Lok Sabha called censure motion. We'll discuss all these types of motions in union legislature, but very briefly here, to understand what is this collective responsibility. Let's say against a minister, censure motion has been passed. Censure motion means Lok Sabha has expressed extreme disapproval against this minister. Extreme disapproval. If the censure motion is passed against this minister A, it amounts to censure of the entire Council of Ministers. That means the censure of one minister means censure of the entire Council of Ministry as well. That is what we call collective responsibility. That means what is collective responsibility? That means collectively, the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers will be collectively responsible to Lok Sabha. If they have the majority in Lok Sabha, which is simple majority, they will continue. The moment they lose simple majority, they have no other option but to resign. That's collective responsibility. Second collective responsibility: Prime Minister, if he resigns or if Prime Minister dies, it is the resignation and death of the entire Council of Ministers. Because Council of Ministers, they swim and sink together. Third implication of collective responsibility: if a censure motion is passed against one minister, it amounts to censure of the entire Council of Ministers as well. That's again a collective responsibility. Fourth implication of collective responsibility: let's say there's a Council of Ministers meeting today. I'm the Prime Minister, we have Council of Ministers. We are debating a particular bill, or we are debating a particular policy. That's something that we have to do. Let's say on this particular policy, there is a disagreement. One minister does not agree with this. You can disagree in this Council of Ministry meeting, but once the Council of Ministers has taken a decision that we will go ahead with this policy, we will go ahead with this bill, then it is your responsibility as well to defend this bill, to defend this policy inside the parliament, outside the parliament as well. If you can't do that, you have no other option but to resign. Pandit Nehru was the Prime Minister. B.R. Ambedkar was the Law Minister. Hindu Code bills were to be introduced to the parliament. B.R. Ambedkar disagreed with these bills. Despite the fact that he was the champion of Hindu Code law, but he disagreed with the manner in which Pandit Nehru wanted these bills to have been passed by the parliament. He disagreed with the bill. He disagreed with the policy. And what he did, he resigned from the Council of Ministry. That means collective responsibility means that if an individual minister is not in a position to defend a particular policy or a particular bill outside the parliament, inside the parliament, then you have no other option but to resign from the Council of Ministry. I'll give you one more example. Arif Muhammad Khan was the minister in the cabinet of Rajiv Gandhi. There was a verdict of the Supreme Court, a very famous case called Shah Bano case. What was the Shah Bano case all about? Shah Bano, an old lady, she was divorced by her husband. And as per the Muslim law, if she was divorced by her husband, she could have been given compensation only for 3 months after the divorce. Shah Bano filed a case in the court asking the court that if I am a Muslim woman, I can get compensation after my divorce only for a period of 3 months. But look at my Hindu woman counterpart. She will get compensation at the time of the divorce and that too for her entire life. Why is there a discrimination between a Hindu woman and a Muslim woman? Supreme Court said, no, such discrimination should not exist. And in fact, you will get compensation not for 3 months but for your entire life. There were huge protests by the radical mullahs, the so-called clerics of the Muslim community, that the Supreme Court is interfering in our personal affairs. The Supreme Court is interfering in our religious matters. If our religion tells us that you have to pay compensation to your divorced wife only for 3 months, why is Supreme Court interfering and saying you have to give compensation to your divorced wife for the entire life? You're interfering in our matters. And these radical clerics and mullahs, they requested the Rajiv Gandhi government to pass a law so that this judgment of the Supreme Court can be nullified. So that this law can now say that you have to provide compensation only for 3 months, not for the entire life. When this law was debated in the cabinet meeting, when this law was debated by Rajiv Gandhi as the Prime Minister with his ministerial colleagues, Arif Muhammad Khan disagreed. Arif Muhammad Khan said we should not pass a law. We should not pass a law to overturn the judgment of the Supreme Court. This is high time that we can provide justice to the Muslim women so that if they are divorced, they will get compensation for their entire lives and not only for 3 months. But Rajiv Gandhi government decided we will frame a law. We will pass a law called Muslim Women Rights on Divorce Bill 1986. And when this bill was debated by the Council of Ministry, Arif Muhammad Khan decided that I cannot defend such a bill, neither inside the parliament nor outside the parliament. And what is the option available with me? I will resign from the Council of Ministry. That is collective responsibility. That means when we talk about collective responsibility, Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers, they are collectively responsible to Lok Sabha. And there are 4 implications of this collective responsibility that we have discussed. But what is this individual responsibility? Collectively, Council of Ministers are responsible to Lok Sabha, but individually, every individual minister is responsible to the President of India. That means an individual minister will continue in office as long as he enjoys the pleasure of the President, which basically means the pleasure of the Prime Minister. As soon as this individual minister loses the pleasure of the President, he will be removed from his office, or he will be asked by the President to submit his resignation. That is what individual responsibility is all about. And individual responsibility has one more implication. The president may ask a concerned minister, let's say a minister of external affairs, please come to my Rashtrapati Bhavan and tell me what is the progress that you have made, your ministry has made on the diplomatic front. That means individually, the president may ask the individual ministers to submit reports to the president. That's another implication of individual responsibility. While I was discussing Council of Ministry, I took one name, cabinet, although I did not elaborate it. But now let's elaborate and see the difference between Council of Ministers and the cabinet. Let's say, in the language of mathematics, this is a superset. This superset is Council of Ministers. Within the superset, there is one subset, and that is what we call cabinet. That means cabinet ministers, they are part of Council of Ministers, but all Council of Ministers are not part of the cabinet. Council of Ministers is what we say, this limit is 15% of the strength of Lok Sabha. But there are a few members of the Council of Ministers, those who are part of the cabinet. But what is the difference between Council of Ministers and the cabinet? Now let's understand the difference between Council of Ministers and the cabinet. And I'll give you a mathematical formula. Council of Ministers includes cabinet ministers, ministers of state, plus ministers of state with independent charge, plus there can be deputy ministers as well. That means Council of Ministers is the superset, which includes all the cabinet ministers, ministers of state with independent charge, there can be deputy ministers as well. But what is the difference between a cabinet minister and a minister of state? Minister of state and minister of state with independent charge, and a deputy minister. Let's have a look at that. Let's say, for example, a cabinet minister is someone who is in charge of the entire ministry. Entire ministry means cabinet minister of home, external affairs, defense, finance, agriculture, health and family welfare, so on and so forth. Let's say cabinet minister for home is Mr. Rajnath Singh, because he handles the entire ministry. Rajnath Singh is the cabinet minister. But this ministry, home, it has various departments as well. Which of these departments? For example, within home ministry, there is department of home, there is department of official language, there is department of states, there is department of internal security, there is a department of border management, there is a department of Jammu and Kashmir affairs as well. The cabinet minister handles the entire ministry of home. But within this entire ministry, there are various departments. If there is a minister who is in charge of official language, he is called minister of state. That means the cabinet minister is a minister who handles the entire ministry. But within this ministry, there can be various departments. If a minister handles one or more departments, such a minister is called as minister of state. But minister of state is under a cabinet minister. That means minister of state is under a cabinet minister, or in corporate language we can say that the reporting manager of a minister of state is the cabinet minister. So that is the difference between a cabinet minister and a minister of state. Similarly, let's say we have a cabinet minister of finance, Mr. Arun Jaitley. Since he handles the entire finance ministry, he is a cabinet minister. But this finance ministry has various departments. There's a department of expenditure, there's a department of revenue, there's a department of financial services, there's DIPAM, Department of Industrial Promotion and Asset Management, there is DIPAM, Department of Investment and Public Asset Management, there is Department of Economic Affairs, DEA. If Arun Jaitley handles the entire ministry, Arun Jaitley is the cabinet minister for finance. But there is a minister who handles one or more departments within the ministry. Such an individual is minister of state. That's the difference between a cabinet minister and a minister of state. But now, who is a minister of state with independent charge? Normally, when the portfolios are announced, portfolios are allocated, ministries are allocated to various individuals. There are some ministries or some portfolios which are kept by Prime Minister within himself. For example, Prime Minister is also the Minister of Atomic Energy. Prime Minister is also the Minister for Space. Prime Minister is also a Minister for Public Grievances, so on and so forth. But if there is a minister who has been given the charge of a department, but he has to handle this department individually, independently, that means this department does not come under any cabinet minister. There's a department, this department is given to a minister, that you handle this department independently. There won't be a cabinet minister in charge of this department. If you handle this department individually, you are a minister of state but with independent charge. That means your reporting manager is not a cabinet minister. Your reporting manager is the prime minister. Sometimes what happens, the prime minister wants to groom young ministers, but he does not want them to handle all these departments individually. So he keeps the ministry with himself, but he gives the independent charge to these young ministers. You handle these departments individually, but you will be responsible to me. Your reporting manager will be me, so that I can groom you, so that tomorrow you may be in a position to independently handle the entire ministry. Such an individual is also called as Minister of State with independent charge. For example, in previous government, Sachin Pilot was a Minister of State with independent charge. Jyotiraditya Scindia was a Minister of State with independent charge. They were handling a department of their own without any cabinet minister, and they were directly responsible and accountable to the prime minister. And sometimes there are deputy ministers as well. These deputy ministers are not given the charge of the entire ministry. They are not given the charge of independent departments. But what these deputy ministers are then for, they assist the ministers. How? For example, in questions and answers. In Parliament, during question hour, 0 hour, which we will discuss in detail in Union Legislature, questions are asked by the parliamentarians to the ministers about what have you done on this particular matter, what is the role of your ministry in these matters. To answer these questions of the parliamentarians, deputy ministers, they assist the ministers in answering these questions, in preparing the answers for these questions. So what is the difference between Council of Ministers and the Cabinet? Council of Ministers includes the Cabinet Ministers. Cabinet Ministers plus Ministers of State plus Ministers of State with independent charge plus deputy ministers. All of these put together is the group called Council of Ministers. That means all Cabinet Ministers are Council of Ministers as well. But all Council of Ministers are not part of the Cabinet. There are 16, 18 or 20 Cabinet Ministers who head the entire ministry. Only these are Cabinet Ministers. And it is this Cabinet which meets frequently as a group. They meet frequently when Prime Minister presides over the cabinet meetings, and they decide what is going to be the policy of the government of India. And then these cabinet ministers will communicate to their deputies, to their ministers of state, the decisions that have been taken at these cabinet meetings. But interestingly, this word cabinet was not mentioned in the original constitution. The constitution of 1950 never talked about this word cabinet. This word was added to the constitution for the first time as a result of the 44th Constitutional Amendment Act in the year 1978, when the constitutional amendment said that for the imposition of national emergency, the written advice of the cabinet or the written permission of the cabinet is required. So this cabinet will have to give a written advice to the president, and only then president can impose national emergency in this country. That is what 44th Amendment talked about. That means 44th Amendment used the term cabinet for the first time. Otherwise, this cabinet was a convention. The convention that we borrowed from United Kingdom. Then there is another term called kitchen cabinet. What is this kitchen cabinet? It's an informal body. Not mentioned anywhere in the constitution, but it's an informal body. What is kitchen basically? Kitchen is a place where you cook the food. But what is a kitchen for a government? A place or a body where the policies are cooked. That means all the ministers of the cabinet, they are not consulted by the prime minister. Prime ministers have a select group of cabinet ministers who are the eyes and ears of the prime minister. And it is with them that the prime minister discusses, cooks the policies and the programs, and then presents these policies and the programs before the entire cabinet. To make it even simpler for you, prime minister and these very few selected group of cabinet ministers, they together constitute kitchen cabinet. That means they cook the policies, they cook the plans, they cook the various bills and the legislation, and ultimately present them before the entire cabinet. That means the real policy making entity is this kitchen cabinet. For Atal Bihari Vajpayee, kitchen cabinet included Lal Krishna Advani, Murli Manohar Joshi, Pramod Mahajan, for example. That means select group of cabinet ministers with whom the prime minister discusses, and they cook the policies and the programs of the government. Kitchen cabinet, informal body, not mentioned anywhere in the constitution. And And it is this Prime Minister and the Cabinet which is supreme in the parliamentary democracy that India follows. And we have borrowed these provisions from United Kingdom. That means our parliamentary democracy is modeled along the lines of the British parliamentary democracy. We will leave the office of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers here. And we will revisit the office of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers when we will discuss the Union Legislature. And while discussing the Union Legislature, the real role of the Prime Minister may be right before your eyes. And then you will understand why Prime Minister is the most powerful individual in our constitutional scheme. But before we end this lecture, let's take a look at cabinet committees. What are these cabinet committees? Let's say, for example, a decision is to be taken. Let's say a decision is to be taken on the economic front. Should we have more FDI? How can we have more of FIIs coming into Indian economy? What should be the economic policy of the government? Whenever a decision on the economic front is to be taken, does that mean the Prime Minister should consult only the Finance Minister? Or should the Prime Minister consult some other cabinet colleagues as well? For example, on economic matters, Agriculture Minister should also be involved. Food Processing Minister should also be involved. External Affairs Minister should also be involved. What if there can be a role of a foreign country involved in this matter? So individual decisions can be quick decisions. If Prime Minister consults only the Finance Minister, it can be a quick decision. Quickly we can come up with a solution. But if it's a group decision, we will involve some other cabinet ministers as well. Although the decision may be delayed, but we will get the insights of a large number of people, of a good number of people. And a smart decision can be arrived at. A smart conclusion can be arrived at. That is the logic behind cabinet committees. That means instead of one minister taking the decision, why can't we have a group of ministers, group of cabinet ministers? We will constitute a committee, and this committee will decide what should be the decision on a particular matter. That's how cabinet committees got into existence. But these cabinet committees are extra constitutional devices. That means constitution does not mention cabinet committees. These are extra constitutional entities. But the rules of business and procedure of Lok Sabha, they mention it. How the government will perform, how the government will function, for that there are various rules made. These rules are what we call the rules of business and procedure. And these rules of business and procedure do mention this cabinet committee. And these rules of business and procedure do mention cabinet committees concept. That means although cabinet committees, they are not mentioned in the constitution, but they are mentioned in rules of business and procedure. And there are two types of cabinet committees. Standing, that means permanent. Ad hoc, that means for a temporary period. I'll give you one example of an ad hoc cabinet committee. When the 1962 war broke out between India and China, a cabinet committee on war was constituted at that time. Prime Minister and some selected cabinet ministers, they would discuss and decide on India's approach and India's policy towards China when the war was going on. And once the war was over, this cabinet committee on war was disbanded. That was an ad hoc committee. But there are some standing committees, permanent cabinet committees, and it is the discretion of the Prime Minister. How many cabinet committees can exist? When Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, there were sometimes 10, sometimes 12 cabinet committees. But now Prime Minister Modi has 6 cabinet committees. Let's discuss which these 6 cabinet committees are and what are the roles and the functions performed by these cabinet committees. As I told you, there are 6 cabinet committees as on 19th November 2018. First is Appointments Committee of the Cabinet. Important appointments have to be made. For example, RBI Governor is to be appointed. Principal Secretaries are to be appointed. All the appointments at the level of the Joint Secretary or above, at the central level. If they are to be appointed, for that there is a committee of the Cabinet called Appointments Committee of the Cabinet, headed by the Prime Minister, and Minister of Home Affairs is a member of Cabinet Committee on Appointments. That means there is a Cabinet Committee on Appointments specifically for the appointments at the central level. RBI Governor, appointments to Prasar Bharati, appointments to Joint Secretary and above level officers. All these appointments are made by Appointments Committee of the Cabinet. Then there is a Cabinet Committee on Accommodation. For example, there are various assets of the government of India. There are various bungalows, there are various flats available to the government of India, and now these flats or bungalows are to be allocated to various cabinet ministers. They have to be allocated to various important personalities. They have to be allocated to members of the parliament. For that, there's a cabinet committee on accommodation headed by the Home Minister Shri Rajnath Singh. And these are the other members of the cabinet committee on accommodation. You don't have to remember the names of who are the members of these cabinet committees. You just have to understand one thing. What is the purpose of cabinet committee on appointments? And who heads the cabinet committee on appointments? Prime Minister. What is the purpose of cabinet committee on accommodation? And who heads the cabinet committee on accommodation? Home Minister. Then there is a very important committee called Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. It is headed by the Prime Minister, and some important ministers are part of this cabinet committee. There are some special invitees to this cabinet committee on economic affairs as well. But what is the purpose of this cabinet committee on economic affairs? Should FDI be enhanced in a particular sector or not? This decision will be taken by cabinet committee on economic affairs. The inflation is rising in this country, and this inflation is primarily because of food inflation. For that we need pulses. For that we need onions. For that we need potatoes. There should be a ban on the export of onions. Who decides this? Cabinet committee on economic affairs. Let's import pulses from outside. Who takes such a decision? Cabinet committee on economic affairs. That means important decisions of the economy are taken by cabinet committee on economic affairs. Then there is cabinet committee on parliamentary affairs. And this cabinet committee on parliamentary affairs is headed by Minister of Home Affairs. It is not headed by the Prime Minister. So you have to be absolutely sure which cabinet committee is headed by the Prime Minister, which cabinet committee is not headed by the Prime Minister. This cabinet committee on parliamentary affairs is headed by the Home Minister. But what is the role of this cabinet committee on parliamentary affairs? When we will discuss Union Legislature, I will tell you that it is the power of the President that he can summon the Indian Parliament. That means he can convene the session of the Indian Parliament. He can end the session of the Indian Parliament. But that is on paper. On paper, it is the power of the Parliament that he can summon the session of the Indian Parliament. He can terminate the session of the Indian Parliament. But he takes all these decisions on the advice of the Prime Minister and the Council of Ministers. But in practice, this advice is given by Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs. When Parliament is to be summoned, when parliamentary session is to end, all these decisions are taken by Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs. What should be the legislative agenda from the government side? That is also decided by Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs. What is this legislative agenda? That means now monsoon session of Indian Parliament will start. And in this monsoon session of Indian Parliament, a triple talaq bill is to be presented before the Parliament. An RBI bill is to be presented to the Parliament. IIM bill is to be presented to the Parliament. What should be the legislative agenda? What should be the legislative business that will be carried out on the government side in parliamentary session? That is decided by this Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs. Then there is Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs. It is often called as Super Cabinet. And it is often referred to as the most important cabinet committee. All the important political decisions are taken at this Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs. That is why it is called as Super Cabinet. Important foreign policy decisions are also taken at this Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs, and this Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs is also headed by the Prime Minister. But perhaps one Cabinet Committee of significance is the 6-month Cabinet Committee on Security. And it is the composition of this Cabinet Committee on Security that you have to be absolutely sure about. Because this Cabinet Committee on Security is headed by the Prime Minister, and it involves 4 of the top cabinet ministers of the government of India. Which of these 4 top cabinet ministers? Minister for Home, Minister for Finance, External Affairs and Defence. All these 4 top ministers, along with the Prime Minister, they are part of this Cabinet Committee on Security. Any decision which has internal security implications or external security implications are taken at this Cabinet Committee on Security. For example, whether Armed Forces Special Powers Act should be continued in Northeast and Jammu and Kashmir or not, that decision is taken at Cabinet Committee on Security. Ban on terrorist organizations. For example, when Jamaat-e-Islami for Jammu and Kashmir was banned under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, that decision was taken at Cabinet Committee on Security. When Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front of Yasin Malik was banned under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, that decision was taken at Cabinet Committee on Security. And it is this Cabinet Committee on Security which decides on important and critical internal and external security matters for the Government of India, and it is headed by the Prime Minister. So out of these 6 cabinet committees, 2 are not headed by the Prime Minister. One is Cabinet Committee on Accommodation and the other is Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs. All the 4 other cabinet committees are headed by the Prime Minister. Composition-wise, you have to remember the composition of Cabinet Committee on Security, and it is very easy to remember. Prime Minister and 4 top cabinet ministers. That is what you need to know regarding cabinet committees. So in this chapter, what have we discussed? We have discussed Union Executive, who all are part of the Union Executive: President, Vice President, Prime Minister, Council of Ministers, and Attorney General of India. And now we will discuss the office of the Attorney General of India. Now, in this lecture, let us discuss the office of Attorney General of India, mentioned under Article 76 of the Indian Constitution. Who is Attorney General of India? What is the role played and performed by Attorney General of India? How is he appointed? How is he removed from the office? All this we are going to discuss in this lecture. But first up, let me ask you a very simple question. Can you guess which entity files the highest number of cases in the judiciary? And against which entity, highest number of cases are filed in the judiciary? That means I'm asking you to make a guess. Which is the biggest litigant in this country? Biggest litigant against whom the highest number of cases are filed in the judiciary? And this entity also files the highest number of cases in the judiciary. Which is this entity? That entity is the Government of India, the biggest litigant in this country. But there has to be someone who can represent the Government of India in the judiciary. For example, there's a case against the Government of India in Supreme Court, or there's a case filed by the Government of India in the Supreme Court, or various high courts in this country. There has to be someone to represent the Government of India in all these cases. And who is that individual? Attorney General of India. That's why we call Attorney General of India as the first law officer of this country, or the highest law officer in this country. But what is the role of this institution? Attorney General of India is assigned a duty by the President that you have to represent the Government of India in all cases where the Government of India is concerned. That means in Supreme Court, in various high courts, if Government of India is a party to a dispute, if Government of India is concerned with that case, the job of the Attorney General of India is to represent the Government of India when Government of India is concerned in any matter. There is another role played by Attorney General of India, and that is under Article 143 of Indian Constitution. What is Article 143? Presidential reference. What is this presidential reference? Under the Constitution of India, Supreme Court is the advisor of the President of India. That means President's advisor is the Supreme Court, and the President can refer any matter to the Supreme Court, asking the views of the Supreme Court on that matter. That is what we call presidential reference. And whenever such matter is referred to the Supreme Court by the President will be represented in the court by the Attorney General of India. That means what is the position, what is the status of the Government of India on this particular issue? That will be projected by the Attorney General of India. I will give you an example. A few years ago, the Supreme Court of India cancelled 122 2G licenses. Why? Because the Supreme Court said that the Government of India followed a policy called first come, first serve policy. First come, first serve policy was employed by the Government of India, and through this policy, spectrum, 2G spectrum, was allocated to various corporates. The Supreme Court said this is a flawed policy. You should not have opted for first come, first serve basis by allocating spectrum. Instead, you should have followed the auction route. You should have auctioned the 2G spectrum. By following the auction route, the government would have acquired massive revenue if the 2G spectrum was allocated not on the basis of first come, first serve, but on the basis of the auction. Then the President referred this matter to the Supreme Court, asking the views of the Supreme Court about how should we proceed when spectrum or natural resources are to be allocated by the Government of India. That means this matter of 2G spectrum allocation was referred by the President to the Supreme Court, asking the views of the Supreme Court on this matter. But while the Supreme Court hears this matter, there has to be someone who can present the story of the Government of India, who can present the side of the Government of India, and that individual is Attorney General of India. That means who is this Attorney General of India? The highest law officer in this country. He has been assigned the task by the President that you have to represent the Government of India in all cases when Government of India is a party or when Government of India is a concerned entity. And second, whenever presidential reference is heard by the Supreme Court, there has to be someone who can present the side of the Government of India when Supreme Court is hearing this presidential reference, and this individual or entity is Attorney General of India. But now let's look at how this Attorney General of India is appointed. Attorney General of India is appointed by the President of India. But I've told you before that in constitutional scheme in India, President is a rubber stamp. While exercising his powers, the executive powers of the President is bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers headed by the Prime Minister. So whichever name is recommended by the Prime Minister to the President for being appointed as the Attorney General of India, that individual is appointed as Attorney General of India by the President. That means the President appoints Attorney General of India based on the advice of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. But what should be the qualification of somebody who can be appointed as the Attorney General of India? Anybody who is qualified to be appointed as a judge of the Supreme Court is qualified to be appointed as the Attorney General of India. But who is qualified to be appointed as the judge of the Supreme Court? There are few qualifications. Number one, universal qualification. This individual shall be the citizen of India. Second, any individual who has been a judge of a high court or one or more high courts for 5 years in succession. That's another qualification. But if you are a citizen of India, but you are not a judge of a high court or one or more high courts for 5 years, but you are an advocate at one or more high courts for more than 10 years, even then you are qualified to be appointed as the judge of the Supreme Court. And there's another qualification. If you are a distinguished jurist, does that mean you have to follow all these qualifications and then you can be eligible to be appointed as the judge of the Supreme Court? No, it is or. You have to be a citizen of India and 5 years as a judge in one or more high courts. If not, 10 years as an advocate in one or more high courts. If not, you should be a distinguished jurist in the eyes of the President of India. And if these are the qualifications required for somebody to be appointed as the judge of the Supreme Court, then you are also qualified to be appointed as the Attorney General of India. That means the Attorney General of India is appointed by the President, and the President shall appoint a person who is qualified to be appointed as a judge of the Supreme Court, and such an individual is qualified to be appointed as the Attorney General of India. Now there is a third role played and performed by Attorney General of India. I told you that the role of the Attorney General of India is to represent the Government of India in all cases when Government of India is concerned, to represent the President or the Government of India. When a presidential reference is heard by the Supreme Court, it shall be the duty, that's role number 3, it shall be the duty of the Attorney General to give advice to the Government of India upon such legal matters and to perform duties of any legal character as may from time to time be referred or assigned to him by the President. Now let me give you an example. Let's say for example, in West Bengal, President's rule is to be imposed. The Governor will submit a report to the President that in West Bengal there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery. The only solution is impose President's rule in West Bengal. We will discuss this in detail when we will
up emergency powers of the president. But very briefly, in a particular state, the government can be suspended, president's rule can be imposed if in the state there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery. But even this decision of the president to impose president's rule in West Bengal can be challenged to the court, can be challenged to the judiciary, and when this case is challenged to the judiciary, there has to be someone to represent the government of India. In this case, it is the Attorney General of India. But before taking the decision to impose president's rule in West Bengal, Attorney General of India is consulted. Attorney General of India is consulted by the government of India that look, we have received this report from the governor of West Bengal, and the governor of West Bengal says because of these 4 or 5 reasons, there is a breakdown of constitutional machinery in West Bengal, and that is why president's rule should be imposed in West Bengal. What do you think? Are these legally justifiable clauses? Are these legally justifiable claims of the governor? If tomorrow the government of West Bengal is going to contest this president's rule, is going to challenge the imposition of president's rule, can you defend us in the Supreme Court? Can you defend us in the Calcutta High Court? Can you do that? That means on such legal matters, the Attorney General of India advises the government of India. The Attorney General may say none of the grounds mentioned in the governor's report justifies imposition of president's rule, so I cannot defend it. Or the Attorney General may say that all these claims are justifiable, all these reasons are justifiable, so you can go ahead and impose president's rule in West Bengal, and I can safely defend you in the judiciary if the government of West Bengal challenges the imposition of president's rule in West Bengal. That is another role played by the Attorney General of India, providing legal assistance, providing legal advice to the government of India. Now let's say, for example, in case of a Rafale deal, there was a case in the Supreme Court that Rafale deal was a corrupt deal. There should be an investigation into the Rafale deal. This case was filed in the Supreme Court by few activists and politicians as well. Ultimately, it was the responsibility of the Attorney General of India to justify the Rafale deal in the Supreme Court. That's another role played and performed by Attorney General of India. I'll give you another example. Let's say, for example, there was a case in the judiciary that triple talaq should be declared unconstitutional. The Muslim practice, wherein a husband says talaq, talaq, talaq 3 times and divorces his wife, this practice should be declared unconstitutional. Who filed this case? One lady, Shaira Banu. Shaira Banu filed this case in the Supreme Court. The Attorney General of India had to present the government of India's stand on this matter. Whether government of India agrees on triple talaq or government of India is against this practice of triple talaq. Someone has to convince, someone has to convey the stand of the government of India on triple talaq to the judiciary. And who conveys the stand of the government of India? Attorney General of India. That means if we can sum it up, the role of Attorney General of India is he defends the government of India whenever there is a case against the government of India, and he also provides legal advice to the government of India. Or any other role can be assigned to the Attorney General of India by the President of India. That is something very important for your prelims examination. But now let's look at some of the important points relevant for your prelims examination related to the office of Attorney General of India. I told you who can be appointed as Attorney General of India. Someone who is qualified to be appointed as the judge of the Supreme Court. But there is a retirement age for judges of the Supreme Court. What is the retirement age? 65. But this age limit of 65 does not apply to Attorney General of India. That means it is not that if there is an Attorney General of India who has crossed the age of 65, he should be removed from this office. Or if there is somebody who is above the age of 65, this individual cannot be appointed as Attorney General of India. No, because age limit of 65 for the judges of the Supreme Court, it does not apply to the Attorney General of India. And I will give you an example. The current Attorney General of India, Mr. K.K. Venugopal, is 88 years old. And if the qualification to be appointed as Attorney General of India is that you should be qualified to be appointed as the judge of the Supreme Court, but the judge of the Supreme Court retires at the age of 65, how can K.K. Venugopal be appointed as Attorney General of India and to continue as Attorney General of India despite the fact that he is 88 years old? One important point for your prelims, this age limit for the judges of the Supreme Court does not apply to Attorney General of India. Another important point, Attorney General of India is not a member of the cabinet. Attorney General of India is not a cabinet minister, he's not part of the cabinet, but he's an integral part of the Union Executive. Union Executive consists of President, Vice President, Prime Minister, Council of Ministers, and Attorney General of India. That means Attorney General of India is not part of the cabinet, but he is part of the Union Executive. Very important statement for your prelims. And now, third important point, doctrine of pleasure. If Attorney General of India is appointed, what is the tenure? What is the term of office for Attorney General of India? And on this, we come to an interesting concept called doctrine of pleasure. The Attorney General of India holds office as long as he enjoys the pleasure of the President of India. But it is not a personal pleasure of the President of India, it is the pleasure of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. That means Attorney General of India can continue to remain in office as long as President wishes, as long as Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers wish. So there is no specific tenure, there is no specific term of office for Attorney General of India. But normally this post is viewed as a political post. That is why when UPA 2 was in power, Ghulam-e Nahanbati was the Attorney General of India. And as soon as Dr. Manmohan Singh lost the power, the Congress party lost the elections, a new government was sworn in headed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Then in that case, Ghulam-e Nahanbati submitted his resignation, and then Mukul Rohatgi was appointed as the Attorney General of India. But for 3 years, Mukul Rohatgi continued, and then he resigned. And later on, Mr. K.K. Venugopal was appointed as the Attorney General of India. That means whenever Attorney General of India is appointed, his term of office coincides with the term of office for the government. If the government continues, Attorney General of India can also continue. But as soon as there is change in the government, normally the convention tells us that Attorney General of India submits his resignation to the President so that the new government can appoint a new individual as the Attorney General of India. Because this post is largely viewed as a political post, and his remuneration is decided by the President of India. These are a few important points that you need to understand so far as Attorney General of India is concerned. Few more important points. The Attorney General has the right of audience in all courts in the territory of India. What does that mean? Let's say, for example, there is Kerala High Court. And in Kerala High Court, there is a case being heard by the Chief Justice of Kerala High Court concerning 2 parties. Government of India is not involved. It's a case between 2 parties. Now, if you were to enter the Kerala High Court, and if you were to seek the permission of the Chief Justice of Kerala High Court, that I should be also heard on this case, the court will ask you a simple question. How are you related to this case? What is your locus standi on this case? Why should we hear you? But this question, or these questions, cannot be asked to the Attorney General of India. If Attorney General of India walks into Kerala High Court, and if he says that I should be heard in this case, the Kerala High Court will give the permission to Attorney General of India because he has the right of audience in all courts in this country. That is the privilege available to the Attorney General of India. To make it even simpler for you, there's a court in India hearing a dispute, hearing a case between 2 parties. And none of these parties is Government of India. If Attorney General of India walks into this court, the court will have to hear the Attorney General of India because maybe he has to say something on behalf of the Government of India. And since he is the Attorney General of India, one of the privileges available to him is that he has the right of audience in all courts in this country. That's a very important point. Another important point, Attorney General of India has the right to speak in the Parliament. He can speak in the Parliament despite the fact that he's not a member of Parliament, but he can come attend the proceedings of the Parliament of India, can speak in the Parliament as well. He can even be a member of any committee of the Parliament. Normally, parliamentary committees are reserved for parliamentarians. Non-parliamentarian cannot be a member of any parliamentary committee, but a privilege is available to Attorney General of India that you can attend a parliamentary proceeding, you can speak in both houses of the Indian Parliament, you can speak even at the joint sessions of Indian Parliament, you can be even a member of any parliamentary committee, but you won't have the right of vote. Why? Because since you're not a member of the Parliament, you will not have right to vote, but you can be a member of any parliamentary committee as well. That's the privilege available with Attorney General of India. And Attorney General of India enjoys all the privileges and immunities
that are available to a member of parliament. What are these privileges? What are these immunities? We shall discuss in detail in our chapter Union Legislature. But here you need to remember one thing. All the privileges, all the immunities that are available to the members of the parliament, all these privileges and immunities are also available to Attorney General of India. Few more important points so far as your prelims is concerned. If Attorney General of India represents the government of India in Supreme Court, various high courts in this country, can Attorney General of India take up private practice? Can he take up individual cases? Can he take up the cases of corporates? Yes, he can do that. But the opponent should not be the state. That means can Attorney General of India, because he is one of the senior most lawyers in this country, can this Attorney General of India take up private practice as well? Yes, he can take up private practice, but the opposite party should not be the state. That means you can't fight a case against the state on behalf of a private individual because you're representing the state. You can take up private cases, but the opposite party should not be the state. Second, he cannot defend the accused in a criminal case without the permission of the government of India. How? I told you in Fundamental Rights chapter, what is the difference between a civil case and a criminal case? Criminal case is such that the opposite party, one of the party in this case is the state. But the state is represented by Attorney General of India. How can Attorney General of India, who has the power to represent the state, who has the duty to represent the state, how can Attorney General of India fight a case on behalf of an individual in a criminal case and that too against the state? That means a criminal case, since it is against the state, cannot be taken up by the Attorney General of India without the permission of the government of India. Now you might say that there is a confusion between point 1 and point 2. Attorney General can pursue his own case if the opponent is not the state. That I agree, that I understood. But the second point is more or less the same. I cannot defend if I'm the Attorney General of India any accused in a criminal case without the permission of the government of India. There is some confusion here. I will remove that confusion. Attorney General of India represents the government of India. Now what if there is a criminal case in Gujarat or Maharashtra or Jammu and Kashmir, and that criminal case is against the government of Maharashtra, against the government of Karnataka, against the government of Jammu and Kashmir, but I represent the government of India? Can I defend the accused in this criminal case? I cannot do that without the permission of the government of India. That is the difference between point 1 and point 2. Another important statement: Attorney General of India does not fall in the category of the government servants. Can be a potential statement for your prelims examination. And I'll take you back to the first statement that I made in this lecture. The biggest litigant is the government of India, against whom the highest number of cases are filed, and the state files the highest number of cases in the judiciary. Attorney General of India has the role and the responsibility and the duty to defend the government of India. But if so many cases are filed against the government of India, so many cases are filed by the government of India, can one individual defend the government? Simply not possible. That is why there are others who assist the Attorney General of India. And who are these individuals? Solicitor General of India, Additional Solicitor General as well. But how many Solicitor Generals can be appointed? How many additional Solicitor Generals can be appointed? That's the discretion of the government, depending upon the number of cases. That's the discretion of the government of India. That means there has to be one Attorney General of India, and he is assisted by n number of Solicitor Generals, n number of additional Solicitor Generals. But there is one important distinction that you have to draw. Attorney General of India is a constitutional post, is a constitutional entity. Solicitor General, Additional Solicitor General, these posts are not mentioned in the Constitution. Constitution only talks about Attorney General of India. And to assist Attorney General of India, we have some extra constitutional entities as well. That is what we call Solicitor Generals and Additional Solicitor Generals of India. That is what you need to understand from this topic, Attorney General of India, primarily relevant for your prelims examination. Now, as of now, what have we discussed? We have discussed the office of the President of India. We have discussed the office of the Vice President, Prime Minister, Council of Ministers, Attorney General of India, so on and so forth. When we talk about Union Executive consists of President, Vice President, Prime Minister, his Council of Ministers, and Attorney General of India. Now let's look at cabinet committees. And for that, let me tell you what these cabinet committees are all about. If I were to ask you, what type of decision is a better decision? A decision taken individually or a decision taken collectively? Now you might say individual decisions are better. Why? Because individual decisions are quicker. Individual decisions are faster. There is no delay when an individual has to take a decision. But collective decisions may get delayed because so many people are involved, so many thought processes are involved, and ultimately decision might get delayed. But if you look at effective decision, would always be collective decision. Because individual decision may be hasty as well. Individual decision may be irrational as well. But when many people are together deciding upon a particular issue, and this issue is discussed threadbare by various other individuals, then the decision, although it might be delayed slightly, but this decision will be a well thought out decision. This is where cabinet committee concept comes into picture. According to the constitution of this country, the president can make rules for the conduct of business in this country. And that is how various transaction of business rules have been passed. This is where the idea of cabinet committees come into picture. Cabinet committees, few individual cabinet ministers, they come together and take the decision on behalf of the entire cabinet. That's what we call cabinet committee. That means what is this cabinet committee? A group of cabinet ministers, they come together, decide upon few issues, and take the decision on behalf of the entire cabinet. That's what we call cabinet committee. But what is the real purpose of these cabinet committees? Let's say, for example, they have to take a decision on oil. Let's say crude oil. This decision on crude oil cannot be taken by an individual ministry alone. Why? Crude oil affects our economy. That means finance minister ideally should take this decision. Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman ideally should take this decision. But crude oil is also related to the United States of America. United States of America is pressurizing the government of India that you should cut down your oil import from Iran. So that means external affairs minister will also be involved. Mr. S. Jaishankar will be involved in this matter. That's another issue. Third issue is that this import of crude oil can have an impact on our food processing industries as well. Can have an impact on inflation as well. That means so many ministries will be involved whenever a decision on crude oil is to be taken. So how can one individual minister take a decision on this matter? That is where a group of ministers, cabinet ministers come together and they take a decision on this matter. This is where the idea of cabinet committees come into picture. And the number of cabinet committees vary. And this is the discretion of the Prime Minister of this country. For example, during the time of Dr. Manmohan Singh, there were about 13 cabinet committees that were in operation. During the first term of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, there were 6 cabinet committees. But in his second term, 2 more cabinet committees were added. So as of now, we have 8 cabinet committees. Let's look at all these 8 cabinet committees one by one and what is the role played by these cabinet committees. The first cabinet committee is Cabinet Committee on Appointments. This committee is headed by the Prime Minister. And who is the other member of this cabinet committee? Minister of Home Affairs, Mr. Amit Shah. What is the decision taken by this cabinet committee on appointments? What is the role? What is the functionality of this cabinet committee on appointments? Important appointments that are to be made are cleared by this cabinet committee on appointments. That means 3 service chiefs are to be appointed: Chief of Army Staff, Chief of Air Force, Chief of Navy. All these appointments are cleared by cabinet committee on appointments, headed by Prime Minister, and Home Minister is the other member. Similarly, in the Central Secretariat, all the appointments above the rank of Joint Secretary, they are appointed by cleared by cabinet committee on appointments. Similarly, Solicitor General of India, Governor of Reserve Bank of India, Chairman and members of Railway Board, Chief Vigilance Officers and public sector undertakings, so on and so forth. All these appointments at the central level have to be cleared by this committee, a very important committee called Cabinet Committee on Appointments. Why is it a cabinet committee? Because this committee consists of more than one cabinet minister. One cabinet minister, the Prime Minister, and the other cabinet minister, Minister of Home Affairs. Let's look at another cabinet committee on accommodation. And this cabinet committee on accommodation is headed by Ministry of Home Affairs or Home Minister. That means you have to understand regarding these cabinet committees. Number 1, who is the head of this cabinet committee? Number 2, what is the role and the function played by this cabinet committee? There may be many members part of these committees, but you don't have to remember all those who are the members of these committees. No, you only have to remember the composition of Cabinet Committee on Security, and I'll tell you slightly later why. But what is this Cabinet Committee on Accommodation? It is headed by Home Minister. What is the role of this Cabinet Committee on Accommodation? It determines the guidelines or rules with regard to the allotment of government accommodation. So there are government bungalows, there are government flats, there are government accommodations. These accommodations are to be given to cabinet ministers, accommodations are to be given to members of the parliament, accommodations are to be given to important officers of the central government. All these decisions are taken by Cabinet Committee on Accommodation, headed by Home Minister. Clear? Let's look at Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. There are various important ministers who are part of this Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. Prime Minister is part of it, Finance Minister is part of it, Defense Minister is part of it, Home Minister is part of it. Then there are special invitees who are invited specially for this meetings on Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. But you don't have to remember who all are part of these Cabinet committees. You have to remember one thing: that Prime Minister is the head of Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. And what is the role and functionality of this Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs? It is supposed to review economic trends, problems, and prospects for involving a consistent and integrated economic policy. And let me tell you how. Whether FDI in insurance is to be hiked or reduced, this decision will be taken by Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. Inflation is there. Inflation, the rise of the general price level in the country, in the society. Now, more or less, this inflation in India is because of food inflation. So, if inflation is because of food, should we export food? Because inflation is there because of food. So, we should take steps to limit the export of food items. That means export of pulses, dals, oils, cooking oils, for example, should be banned for a specific period. Who will take this decision? Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. If the inflation is because of food items, then we should bring in more and more imports from foreign countries into India. Food imports should be facilitated in this country. Such a decision is taken by Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. That means all these important decisions that affect the economy of this country, all these decisions are taken by Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. This committee gives the direction to the economic philosophy of this country. And this Cabinet Committee is headed by the Prime Minister of this country. That's another committee. Let's look at Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs. And this Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs is headed by the Home Minister, Mr. Amit Shah. What is the role played by this Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs? We know for sure, and we will discuss this in the Parliament as well, that parliamentary session is convened by the President. That means President can convene the session of the Indian Parliament. President will issue an order and say that the Parliament will meet from this period to that period, for monsoon session, for budget session, for winter session. But President is a rubber stamp. Basically, President cannot convene the session of the Indian Parliament without the aid and advice of the Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. And in reality, this advice is given by Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs. Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs advises the President when the session of Indian Parliament is to be convened, when the session of the Indian Parliament should be ended, which are these bills that have to be taken from the government side on this particular session of the Indian Parliament. That means, let's say, for example, the government decides that we will take up IIM bill in the next session of the Indian Parliament. We will take up Triple Talaq bill on the next session of the Indian Parliament. We will take land acquisition bill on the next session of the Indian Parliament. We will take citizenship amendment bill on the next session of the Indian Parliament. All these decisions are taken by the Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs. That means Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs draws the schedule for Parliament sessions and monitors the progress of government business in the Parliament. What is this government business? Which bills are to be taken up for discussion? Which motions are to be taken up for discussion? Which resolutions are to be taken up for discussion? And what is a motion? What is a resolution? We will discuss in Union Legislature. But this is the role of Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs headed by the Home Minister. So as of now, we have talked about 4 Cabinet committees. One Cabinet Committee on Accommodation, Cabinet Committee on Appointments, Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs, Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs, now Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs. And many people say that this is one of the most powerful committees of the Indian Cabinet. And some people also refer to this committee as Super Cabinet. And this Parliamentary Committee on Political Affairs is headed by the Prime Minister himself. And what is the role played by this Political Affairs Committee of the Cabinet? It addresses problems related to center-state relations. It examines the economic and political issues that require a wider perspective, but have no internal or external security implications. That means matters related to center-state relations, matters related to the political issues, all these matters are taken up by Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs. That means whether for a particular state, more and more funds are to be made available, that's a political decision, and that decision is taken by Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs. Let's say, for example, tomorrow there is a demand that the office of governor should be abolished. If the office of governor is to be abolished, that means basically for that, the constitution is to be amended. But what is the view of the government on this matter? That means that the opposition is demanding that office of governor should be abolished. For that, constitution should be amended. But what is the position? What is the view of the government on this matter? Because this matter affects the center-state relations. Because after all, governor is viewed as the agent of the center in a state. Such a decision about what should be the position and view of the central government on this contentious center-state issue, that is also determined by this Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs. Clear? Now let's look at Cabinet Committee on Security. Again, this is one of the most powerful committees of the Cabinet. This committee is headed by Prime Minister. But the composition of this committee is very important. Why? Because 4 top ministers are part of this Cabinet Committee on Security. Who are these 4 top cabinet ministers? Minister of Defense, Mr. Rajnath Singh. Minister of Home, Mr. Amit Shah. Minister of Finance, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman. Minister of External Affairs, Mr. S. Jaishankar. Who was the former Foreign Secretary, former Ambassador to China as well as United States of America. He was drafted into the cabinet, despite the fact that at that point in time, he was neither a member of Lok Sabha nor was a member of Rajya Sabha. Even then, he was drafted into the cabinet and became the cabinet minister for external affairs. All these 4 top ministers, together with the Prime Minister, that is the composition of this Cabinet Committee on Security. But what is the role of this Cabinet Committee on Security? The Cabinet Committee on Security deals with issues related to law and order, internal security, policy matters concerning foreign affairs with internal or external security implications. Because so far as Cabinet Committee on Political Affairs is concerned, it does not deal with those matters which have internal or external security implications. Because such a decision is taken by Cabinet Committee on Security. How? Whether in Jammu and Kashmir, Armed Forces Special Powers Act should continue or not. That is the decision taken by Cabinet Committee on Security. Whether in Northeast, Armed Forces Special Powers Act should continue or not, that decision is taken by Cabinet Committee on Security. Whether more and more central paramilitary forces should be deployed to Northeast or Jammu and Kashmir, that decision is taken by Cabinet Committee on Security. Now let's say the government wants to make some defense treaty or an agreement with a foreign country. That means some defense equipment is to be acquired by the Government of India, and the value of this defense acquisition is more than 1,000 crore. Let's say, for example, Rafale jets to be brought by the Government of India after an agreement with the Government of France, after an agreement with the manufacturer of these Rafale jets, who is the Dassault Aviation. That means if the value of this defense acquisition is more than 1,000 crore, such a decision should also be cleared by Cabinet Committee on Security. And Cabinet Committee on Security is headed by Prime Minister, and 4 top ministers are part of Cabinet Committee on Security. Now, 2 more cabinet committees have been constituted, and the thrust of both these cabinet committees is on jobs, job creation, because the report suggests that as of now, unemployment rate in this country is at a 45-year high. That means unemployment rate is very high in this country, and the focus of the government is to create more and more jobs. And that is why 2 committees have been set up. 2 cabinet committees have been set up. Both these cabinet committees are headed by the Prime Minister himself. One such committee is Cabinet Committee on Investment. And what is the role of this cabinet committee? The role of the Cabinet Committee on Investment would be to identify areas. That means more and more investment should be made into this area. And this area can be manufacturing. This area can be infrastructure creation, for example. If more and more investment, and this investment is of more than 1,000 crore, is to be made in these areas, so that ultimately if more infrastructure is created, if more and more trust on manufacturing is to be given, that means it will lead to job creation as well. And for that we have a Cabinet Committee on Investment headed by the Prime Minister himself. And that is the role of this Cabinet Committee on Investment. It will identify key projects which are required to be implemented, which involves investments of 1,000 crore or more with regard to infrastructure and manufacturing. Clear? That's the role of Cabinet Committee on Investment. Now there is another Cabinet Committee on Employment and Skill Development. We are talking about today about demographic dividend. And what is this demographic dividend? The majority of our population is below the age of 25. A bulk of our population is young. Bulk of our population is below the age of 40. And if these are the people who are below the age of 25, tomorrow these are the individuals who are going to enter into the job market. Tomorrow these are the individuals who are going to create jobs as well. That means if we have to overtake China, we have to ensure that we reap the benefits of this demographic dividend. We reap the benefits of this young crowd that are going to enter into the job market, that are going to create jobs as well. If we are not able to provide jobs to them, then this demographic dividend will turn into demographic nightmare for us. For that, we have to provide jobs to them. But for providing jobs to them, we have to first make them employable. The problem today is that there are engineers everywhere in this country, but majority of these engineers cannot be employed because these are unemployable. So if today we are talking about unemployment, we are not talking about unemployability because majority of our engineers, they cannot be employed because they do not possess the skill set that are required in this ever-changing job scenario. For that, we have to enhance their skills. That means we have to focus more on skill development, and that is going to be the task of this Cabinet Committee on Employment and Skill Development. And in this committee is going to be headed by the Prime Minister. So this is the role of these cabinet committees. So as of now, we have 8 cabinet committees. For every cabinet committee, what is the role? What is the function that you have to remember? That you have to memorize. You also have to remember another thing. Who is the head of this particular cabinet committee? Because except 2 committees, one Cabinet Committee on Accommodation, which is headed by Home Minister, Cabinet Committee on Parliamentary Affairs, which is headed by the Home Minister. Except these 2 committees, all other cabinet committees are headed by the Prime Minister himself. That's another important note that you have to make note of. And third one, what is the composition of Cabinet Committee on Security? That's the only thing that you have to remember. And it is not a rocket science to remember the Cabinet Committee on Security's composition. Why? Because it is headed by the Prime Minister and it consists of 4 top cabinet ministers. And who are these 4 top cabinet ministers? Home Minister, Defense Minister, External Affairs Minister, and the Finance Minister. That is what you need to understand from cabinet committees.